Welcome into the Fan Midday Show on a Thursday. Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison guiding you through here in the DriveHubert.com studios. James, I'm not saying it's entirely your fault, but we've grown accustomed to starting our weeks with you, and the one week that we don't have you in here, a Colts player gets busted for gambling, allegedly, as it's an investigation still, even though he has publicly apologized to the point that it appears that it's fully he did it, but you got to wait for the NFL's official ruling. It's a long-winded way of saying, what did you do?
I did nothing. So, quick story, I got a new phone over the weekend, and it kicked me out of Twitter on all of my social media apps, and so I had to reach out to our reps at The Athletic to help me get back into it. They have Twitter people they know, I guess, that can help me get back into my account. So I was logged out of Twitter, and I was thinking, wow, like this is, pretty bad for my job, but luckily nothing's happening. And then that happened. And so I was Twitterless when that was happening. Man. Shout out to Zach Kiefer and my editors for texting me all the tweets that I could not see in real time. And yeah, that was a pretty shocking development, and one that involves allegedly Isaiah Rodgers Sr. So we'll see how it all plays out, but obviously that is not something that they want to have to deal with at this point in the season. I mean, the biggest story was always Anthony Richardson until this happened, and it's going to continue to be Anthony Richardson, but obviously this is a distraction. It qualifies as one.
Our journey today is going to take us through NBA Finals reactions to the Nuggets taking a 2-1 series lead. We'll also get you up to speed with the NBA draft process in the lead-up to that event that's going to take place here in just a couple of weeks, as well as a larger conversation both on the NFL OTAs across the board, off-seasons galore, running backs don't matter anymore. We'll get into all of that, but because I think that the listeners find it fascinating, and I find it very fascinating from the journalistic standpoint of all of this, you never know what type of news story or news item is going to happen on the day. You especially never know what's going to happen with the team you're covering. You expect usually during the offseason to be tame. You already mentioned the Twitter hampering that you had to deal with not being able to access the account, but purely from a reacting to this in real time standpoint. I know it's been a couple days, but this is going to be an ongoing story as the league continues to grapple with the fact that there's at least the bubblings of a gambling problem within the league. I don't want to label it that way just yet because grand scheme of things, 6-7 incidences, I don't want to call it like there's a real problem there, but it's becoming easier and easier for people to be like, well, these are the only ones we know about. There's probably more going on, right? We're not here to recklessly speculate just yet. We'll focus on Isaiah Rodgers Sr. for the moment. Take us through that Monday for you, minus the Twitter barriers that you had to overcome.
Yeah, so even without my account, I was still pretty aware of what was going on as soon as the news broke because people were blowing up my phone, let me know what was happening. And I would just say, at first we didn't know who it was. And so you're reading the story that initially was reported, I believe, by Sports Handle. And I was thinking to myself, okay, this seems pretty legit, because to put something out there like that, if you're really serious about what you do in this field, you vetted this very well. And so then it becomes, okay, how do I try to confirm this on my end? I got confirmation from the Colts, and then I got into, okay, what does this mean? And I knew, like everyone knew, about the gambling that was happening in the NFL, previous punishments, and the first guy I thought of was Calvin Ridley, same division, AFC South, and so, well, now after he's been traded there. Right. So that was my initial reaction was to just jump on it, try to confirm it, as far as the investigation, that is, not who it was. And then it was, just doing research on, okay, what are previous punishments? What is this unnamed player looking at? And so for those who don't know, after that, you're just basically redoing the story as you get more and more information that comes out. And so as soon as Isaiah Rodgers Sr.'s name came out, then it was like, okay, I'm trying to confirm independently that it's him. Like, I don't want to just use at the Athletic ESPN's report or Sports Illustrated report. And so not that I don't trust those guys, but if you're really in this for the right reasons, you want to try to at least independently confirm, because that's the job. They say in journalism, if someone says it's raining, go outside and check. And so you want to make sure you're right. Wasn't able to confirm it, but then obviously, as you stated earlier, Isaiah put a statement out himself, which basically was an admission of some sort of guilt. Now, he never said in it that he, bet on games or gambled, but obviously
he apologized for actions.
Yeah, he said as far as the reports go, paraphrasing, but something along that line, that's when I was like, okay, I feel like this is fair to, one, it's been reported that it is him, and then secondly, he's putting this statement out not for no reason, and so that's when I felt comfortable using his name in my own story and getting it up there. So, I mean, I was probably relaxing on my couch watching Game of Thrones for the first time through. I'm on season 2, folks, and
grinding.
I think it was maybe 5 p.m. or something like that when that came out, and then for the rest of the day until about 11 p.m., you're just updating, trying to confirm and things like that. I mean, I even got on the phone with the Indiana Gaming Commission, which is not a call I expected to make, and emailing their head office and getting responses and statements and things like that. So there was a lot of moving parts, but overall, just knowing the player who is allegedly involved, you feel for him, but then you also wonder, okay, how is this message not getting across to not only, again, allegedly Isaiah Rodgers, but the players we do know have been confirmed, which to my knowledge, it was like 4 Lions players, 1 Commanders player, and another Lions player being investigated, and a second wave, according to ESPN, of players being investigated. So this could get even worse as far as the optics around it. And so it was a hectic day, a crazy day, and one where you really have to take a step back and look at what is the league doing, and have they sort of opened Pandora's box and you're unable to put everything back inside.
Here's my biggest issue with all of this, and it's not about Rodgers right now. We'll get to him in a little bit. We've talked about him a lot the last couple days as well. But you mentioned, as a player, you would think that when you see discipline handed down, that you then have an understanding for, okay, I can't do that. It's not something I'm supposed to do. I'm going to get in trouble. Me and Eddie as coworkers, if Eddie does something that gets him suspended for 6 months, I'm going to quickly understand what it was that Eddie did so that I don't do the same thing, or vice versa. Don't want to be totally use Eddie as the bad egg there. I'll throw myself in there as well. But you would think, okay, now I understand that. They laid down a serious punishment for Eddie. I can't do that. If I do that, I could get worse, if not the same punishment. And that's what I thought was going to happen with Calvin Ridley. Because even at the time, I thought a year was nuts. Not nuts in like it shouldn't happen, but nuts in, wow, that's how they attacked right out of the gate. Yes. Because you cannot afford any idea, even if you weren't betting against your own team, you cannot afford the integrity of the sport to get washed away by gambling scandals or players betting on games. And that's why they came out swinging there. But it doesn't even, it's not one of these things where okay, it happens to your team, so now you're like, oh, wow, this is serious. No, I thought it was serious the entirety of the time. So did you, so did Eddie. But it's magnified now that it happens in the Colts organization, because it's where is this message not getting through to players? And that's not even getting into the possible idea, and this has not been released yet, but if Rodgers had, heaven forbid, bet against the Colts, I mean, it's crazy to me that messaging has not sunk in. And even if it has with a majority of the players, why is it missing with certain guys? And how is that messaging amplified further by the NFL?
Yeah, I think you make a very good point and bring up a lot of good nuance to it, because it isn't as cut and dry, obviously, as we think it is. For those listening, the rules to me are pretty simple. If you're in the NFL, you cannot bet on any NFL games, period.
Makes sense.
And then if you are in the NFL and you do want to bet, you can bet on any other league, but it has to be when you're not doing team business and you're not in a team facility. So you can't do it while you're on the plane going to a game, or while you're at I get it. That feels weird, but okay. It's one of those weird rules of rules of the road that maybe not everybody understands, but hey, it's a rule you can't break. But even when I was listening to Kevin Bone and the guys earlier this week, they had Zaire on, and Zaire was like, some of these guys don't even know what a sports book is. Literally, if you ask, I bet you if we lined up every single Colts player and asked them what is a sports book, some of them, just like I would, before I guess learn more about it, would be like, what sports book? You talking about an autobiography? What are you talking about? And I bet that's true, like you just mentioned, the general population. And so maybe to me, some of the messaging, and again, I haven't sat in on these meetings, I haven't read what they've given to the players, but part of me is is there too much jargon, in the thing for it to actually make sense. And you know how it is, like when you go to doctor's office, dentist, whatever, you read all this stuff, it's like, none of this makes sense. Like, what does this actually mean? What am I signing?
Explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader.
Exactly. And
Sure.
so I think some of that should, like, obviously just state, instead of saying sportsbook, you should say that app on your phone, FanDuel, DraftKings, those are sports books. You cannot use those when you're here. And so I think, again, if you're serious about it, maybe you take the initiative on your own to learn more about it. But with the NFL, to me, the most important thing, and I would imagine to them, is the integrity of the game. Now, I get it. The NFL is in the money-making business, so that's always king. But what's more king than that, and what keeps the money flowing, is the integrity of the game. And so you cannot have these instances where you have players who are betting on NFL games, even if they aren't on their team. People, I think listeners sometimes are like, well, wow, what's the big deal if he bets on a different team? It's because they're not normal human beings. They have insider information. They have buddies around the league. I mean, quite frankly, as a reporter, not to like toot my own horn, but there are times where I'll probably know if a guy's going to play or not before the general public. I don't bet at all, as you all know, because whenever we do the bets at the end of the show, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yep.
I know over and under a money line, that's about it. But yeah, I just
James,
think
a big first five guy.
I have no idea what that means. But again, these are the instances where I just wonder, how do you make this message as plain as possible? And then also, not to go too far into it, there is a real thing that is the addiction of gambling. And so sometimes when we look at these advertisements on TV, it's just like with alcohol. They show you the people in the commercials having a great time and they're having the time of their life. They don't show you sometimes the ugly sides of if you succumb to these things and if you divulge too far into these things, you can't get back out. So I'm not saying that any of these players, I don't know them personally, have gambling addictions, but I'm just saying it's not impossible to think that that's a possibility, because to me, I'm not an expert, but I have been around people who unfortunately have become addicts in one way or the other.
Addiction's very real.
Yes. And again, the logic that you have when you're not addicted to something doesn't apply when you are. And so you can say, hey, don't do that, this is wrong, whatever. But in your mind, you're only thinking about that next opportunity to feel that rush again. And so there's a lot of layers to it, but I do think that the NFL has to come down hard on any player that violates these rules, but also they have to look in the mirror and say, what are we doing to protect them, which sounds pretty disingenuous considering how much it's shoved in our faces, but protect them from themselves and protect their careers and protect the league.
And there's two sides to that coin, right? Because on the one hand, we're all human. Like, I get it. Addiction can happen to literally anybody. So if this was an instance where, take Isaiah Rodgers, for example, where he had felt like he was addicted to gambling, there's two things that would happen then. Doesn't mean that punishment is absolved, and you're not saying that by any means, but it doesn't mean punishment is absolved, but it does mean that help is needed, that help is necessary. Like that's in any walk of life, regardless of what it is you're addicted to. If you fall down the rabbit hole of anything, especially gambling, it's very easy to continue to fall down and dig and dig and dig. So that's one thing, is that if that's a real problem within the NFL, then yes, there needs to be a further pathway by the league. Even if we don't publicly hear about it, some type of pathway of steps to recovery in that regard. I mean, I get it, like drug addiction, alcohol addiction, very, very real things affect your body in way different manners than a betting addiction does. But in terms of the harm it does for your mental faculties, what it could do for your career, your family, your life in general, equally as abusive. So that's the human side of this. Mm-hmm. But, and again, James and I are not saying this in that regard. We can acknowledge the human element while also saying that if you are a professional athlete, it stands to reason for me. This is the only area where I can relate on, where I can relate directly with professional athletes, which is, okay, you know the list of rules. Here's what not to do. Here's what you can do. And I mentioned this earlier in the week. For me, it always felt like, with the way gambling was presented to me as a child, and the way like sports gambling, that world was presented to me as a child, is here's what the Chicago Black Sox did when they fixed the World Series way, way back when. Here's what happened to Pete Rose when he bet on baseball. These are things you don't do as professional athletes. So even as it's gotten more socially accepted for the common man, there is still part of me that if I was in the shoes of an NFL or NBA player and I was told, hey, you can't bet on games in this league, that's a trade-off I'm willing to make for the amount of money I'm likely making as a professional athlete.
Yes, and what I've been saying just to my friends and family, it's like, you already won the lottery.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
You don't need a 16 parlay.
Yeah, like if you've made it to the level of being a professional athlete at the highest level in your respective sport, you hit the lottery. And I will just say real quick that the difference to me, and again, I don't gamble, don't drink, don't do any of those things. I guess I'm boring, but everyone out there, I'm not judging at all. I think it's cool. If you enjoy those things, do it responsibly and have a good time. But I'll say this, what makes sports betting, at least from afar, maybe you all can chime in, is what's unique to me about it is that you don't have to go anywhere to do it.
Right.
Like you have to go out and buy alcohol. You have to go out and buy cigarettes. You have to go out and buy these things. And if you're, on a smartphone, which pretty much everyone has, you can just download the app and do it right from where you are. And there's never really a cutoff or you running out of something unless it's money. And so, again, it's a layered conversation we have to have about it. But I do think, just to drive it back to what the Colts are dealing with at the moment, the punishment, if they find that Isaiah Rodgers did in fact, do some of these things, the punishment will be steep for him. And it's one of those things where, as a reporter, having met him a few times, I'm not saying we're like best buds, but I know the guy and it was, had great interactions with him. You feel for him in a situation, but then you also like understand where the league has to look at it from, and what the team has to look at it from. And so it's a lot on the line, as far as his career. And then particularly this season, Isaiah Rodgers' contract is backloaded. So that means most of his money is on the back end.
Right. He's
on a 4-year, $3.4 million deal, and $2.7 million is due this season. So if he does have to miss this season or an extended period of time, that's a lot of money that he will probably never see again if they review this and find that he did do this. Now, if he didn't do it, hey, more power to him. But it's just a situation where I can say, this is true, that he's in hot water. I think that's fair to say.
I thought EJ Speed put it perfectly earlier this week when they had, which were already planned, which again, it's a weird coincidence. Like I believe this wholeheartedly that these meetings were already planned because the league is spending their offseason going around and addressing gambling, but they sent a representative of each team every year and regarding the gambling policy and stressing it, reminding teams about it. And that was this week. And EJ Speed, major takeaway from it was don't gamble. Now, like on the one hand, look, I get it. Like there's nothing, I've always loved March Madness, the single elimination tournament of that. I love the Super Bowl. Like I grew up loving these major sporting events. But yes, as a casual gambler, it's maybe putting 5, 10, 15, 25, whatever the case may be, wagers. Yeah, I like to be in on the action of any of these big events. I like to be able to, have a dog in the fight and be able to back something that maybe isn't a team that I would have fully followed otherwise. So I get like the fun and the entertainment value in that, because inherently, if you're budgeting yourself and you're understanding this is not a form of second income, this is just a fun way to continue to be involved in the sports world, great. But if you're not, and you've lost sight of that and you've lost track of that, then it can, we mentioned, fall down a really big rabbit hole. So I don't think necessarily that if you're an NFL player, you should be fearful of if it's the off season or whatever, and you're placing a bet on NCAA tournament or conference tournaments or college football playoff, whatever it is. Like, okay, that's fine. Like, my only line is I don't want it involved with the sport you're playing in. I don't care if it's, and that's the league's thing as well. I don't care if you're an MLB player. I don't care if you're in the NBA, whatever. NFL, I don't care if you're playing in the Premier League. I don't want bets being placed on your own team, on your own league in any capacity. And I don't think that's a big ask, like we just mentioned, given what you're going to be generating. In theory, not all contracts are created equal, but for the most part, in today's sports world, a big-time player at a starting position, regardless of where it is on the field, is going to be making more money and doesn't need to necessarily chase it through gambling like any of us would ever potentially need to.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with, I believe, Stephen Holder yesterday, and might have been Mike Chapp as well, and they were just saying, this isn't back in the day where some of the scandals you talked about, in the 20s and things like that, where the money you could make off of throwing a game or doing something like that is more than what you would make as far as your contract. Now, if you are on the 53-man roster throughout an NFL season, even if you're not playing a lot, if you're on that roster for an entire year, you're making really good money, and money that some of the best people in other fields will never see, outside of professional sports. So, again, a lot of layers to it, a lot more to be thought about. And then from a team perspective,
yeah, that's where I was about to take it.
I know that Shane Steichen didn't touch it much at all, but I do think it warrants having to explore possibly picking up a veteran cornerback. And I get it. All the fans want to see the young guys. As a reporter, you want to see the rookies, the guys who could be part of your future. But I just don't know if I trust a cornerback room where the only true veteran at this point would be Kenny Moore II. And I'm not saying that in a bad way for Kenny Moore. I think he's going to be a fine leader. It's just you're putting so much on his shoulders, along with hoping that a bunch of rookies and second-year guys are going to step up and be enough. And I knew that group was going to be, one of the ones where it's kind of up in the air. You're relying on a lot of things to happen all at once, but it's a really big ask and puts them in a very tough position going forward. And at this stage of the offseason, you're not going to find very, very high-level free agents, but I just think that maybe it would really benefit them to still find a veteran just to bring them in and show the younger crowd, this is how you do it, this is how you last in the NFL, and this is how you go about being a professional.
And the names on the list of still available free agents, it's not exactly a treasure trove by any means, as you would expect at this point. I mean, there's still some name recognition on there. Marcus Peters, Eli Apple, Kyle Fuller, just to name a couple of there that are on that free agent list as it stands right now. That from Spot Track, I beg your pardon. When you look at the spot of the Colts in this dilemma that they're in, I go back and forth with it, James, because on the one hand, yes, if it's the right veteran, if it's the right team fit, then yeah, by all means, bring in somebody that's a piece that can help establish good habits within this young cornerback room. On the other hand, you were going to have to make a decision anyway when it came to Kenny Moore and Isaiah Rodgers, if you're going to pay one of them, both of them, or neither of them. Given the path that Rodgers is on right now, that's going to take care of itself. So now in terms of in that secondary of positions, you really have to think about, are we paying them or not? It's just Kenny Moore. This is one of those, again, baptism by fire moments, but unless it looks god-awful, like truly awful within the secondary when you're going in these joint practices, when you're looking in preseason, I would almost lean towards seeing what you have with this rookie class. Because at the end of the day, and I know this is somewhat short-sighted depending on where your pulse is as a Colts fan, you the listeners, this defense, as it stands right now, like adding Marcus Peters, just for the sake of argument, okay, makes the defense perhaps a little bit better, a little bit more confident in terms of your corners that are in there. But depending on the deal you have, it's a one-year deal. You're back in the same situation you would have been with Rodgers anyway. And this team is not contending for legitimate hardware next year. I would almost lean towards giving the rookies the run just to that way of a clear evaluation and then wait till the top of next year's cornerback class. I don't have that in front of me right now, but you're dealing with a cornerback class at the top of free agency versus now in June where you're having to scrape towards the bottom and see what might stick.
Right. And I see your point, and I think it's a good one. I mean, I do understand the need for playing the youth, and also, like we've talked about in previous weeks, this Colts team isn't built to win right now anyway. However, I don't want to undersell the importance of veteran leadership.
Right.
So that's my only gripe with that, is that you want to throw them out there, but you don't want to throw them out there when they could, not be able to swim. And so I figured that Julius Brents, when he becomes fully healthy, he was a guy who was going to have a chance to become a day one starter. I think that's fair to say, especially given where he was drafted in the second round. Darius Rush is probably the next cornerback, rookie cornerback that is next in line. However, he was a 5th round pick. I'm not saying that he can't be a steal. I'm not saying that he doesn't have a lot of upside, but there was a reason that 32 teams passed on him 4 times before he got picked up in the 5th round. So those are just my thoughts on maybe, you want to see the youth play, but just have someone there. And again, it's weighing the cost of paying a guy another season, whether it's a 1-year deal for any of these veterans versus paying with experience. And then I think that experience can go both ways. It can really help you or really like turn you in the other direction if the experience doesn't go well and you aren't able to gain confidence. You aren't able to, get enough reps where you're playing well, understand what's going on. So I get it. Reps are important, but I also think that you cannot have a team be too devoid of leaders and veterans to the point where it's like, okay, how am I supposed to learn if the only guy who's done it before is Kenny Moore? And so Chris Ballard and company obviously have decisions to make after this investigation is adjudicated and we found out what really happened and things like that. So there's a lot more to definitely be uncovered. And so it just puts them in, again, a very unique bind and one that, they probably just didn't see coming. Because when I was going back through some previous like quotes and things like that, and in March at the owners' meetings, Chris Ballard is saying, "Oh, we think Isaiah is a great player, and we expect him to help fill that void of Stephon Gilmore," and that's what everyone was saying. I talked to Ron Milas, the defensive backs coach, a few weeks ago about Isaiah. He's like, "Oh yeah, he's doing a great job. He's understanding our concepts better. He's going to be in for a big season, yada yada yada." And then this happened. So it wasn't like they drafted 3 young cornerbacks because they knew Isaiah Rodgers might not be available like some people on Twitter might have suggested. No, I think that they were truly sort of blindsided by this, and now they have to scramble to, figure out a solution.
I know a lot of people get weird about coincidences, but yeah, that's another one where it's like there's an obvious need with a contract year for both these cornerbacks. They need to be taken in the draft. It's a clear need. I love for a humor standpoint, the tinfoil hats as much as the next guy, but yeah, it was an obvious need that needed to be addressed in this past NFL draft. That's James Boyd. I am Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison is with us as well. We're going to shift our attention towards the college basketball ranks. That's going to include a little bit of a look at the NBA draft that's upcoming here in a couple of weeks. We'll look at the decision that was made by Zach Edey to return to Purdue. We'll also get the Indiana angle in there with Jalen Hood-Schifino and Trace Jackson Davis, hoping to find homes up in the high rent district, if you will, of the NBA draft. That and more with Isaac Trotter of 24/7 Sports when we return on the Fan Midday Show.
Diabetes. Seven five, The Fan.
Still here, living the dream in the DriveHubler.com studio. I'm James Boyd alongside Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison. You're listening to 107.5 The Fan. Jimmy, we had a good time so far talking about all things NFL. I won't say good time, actually. We've had a serious time talking about all things NFL, specifically with the Colts and the alleged gambling incident. But now to pivot to perhaps a more positive topic, we can talk about the NBA draft. IU, Purdue, IU listeners out there, don't you boo me just yet. We have Isaac Trotter, my fellow Illini, on the line. He covers college basketball for 24/7 Sports. So, Isaac, how are you doing, my man?
Good, man. Good to link up with you again. It's been a while, but I'm fun to talk to Boop.
I know. It's always been a while with these guys, but I tell all of the listeners out there that my friends always respond when I need them, so those are the best kinds of friends. So we'll dive into it. I know the big news here this week was that Trayce Jackson-Davis worked out for the Pacers. I was actually had to park in the parking lot, where they do all the media things to go talk to the Indiana Fever at their practice, and it was packed. I was like, wow, this guy's a big deal, obviously. So from your perspective, being a Big Ten guy, seeing Trayce Jackson-Davis throughout college, how do you think he can maybe translate some of those special qualities he has to the NBA despite some of the limitations he has in his game?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't a big Trayce Jackson-Davis fan for the first few years of his career, but, man, he really just, wowed me and really won me over this past year. Just the playmaking that he was able to add to his game. He's never really been, a three-point shooter. That's been a big, conversation point, talking point with Trayce Jackson-Davis. But at the end of the day, he has turned into one of the most productive college players. And I think what you see is on the defensive end of the floor, he's just a madman. He has ability to guard ball screens in different ways. His ability at 6'8", he has a 7'1" wingspan, but he can really be a rim protector. He can loom in the dunker spot. He just does so many good things for you offensively and defensively. And the passing that he added to his bag, especially last year, was phenomenal. He put that Indiana team on his back for months and carried them. Winning is important to him. And so if you look at what he is late in the first round, early in that second round, I feel like he's just going to come in and find a way to just fill in a gap in any which way in a rotation. I don't think he's a plug-and-play starter. I don't know if he's going to flirt with the all-rookie team, right, his first year. But I do think that he is a winning, impactful piece that can help a team like the Pacers just take a big jump as their 7th or 8th man off the bench.
So did you ever get to the bottom of why Brad Underwood did not double Trayce Jackson-Davis? I have to ask. I'm still scarred by this. Still scarred.
Pain and suffering. That is what it was. just to add pain and suffering so they could learn to be better. Yeah, I joke because I felt like Dane Dainja, the Illinois big man. I don't know if he ever recovered from that moment because Trayce Jackson-Davis really just put on a show that night. I feel like that's a game that a lot of people will not forget about anytime soon. He was as good as any player. That was as good a performance as we've seen at the college game last year.
Isaac, when you look up and down mock draft boards, when you analyze the prospects yourself, obviously once we get outside of the top 3, debatably, you're really looking at, okay, projection of where this guy can be 3, 4, 5 years. But when you break it down position by position, where do you feel the deepest area as this draft gets further and further is?
Yeah, I feel like there's some guys here in this second unit of this draft that I feel like are high prioritized recruits coming up that have kind of had iffy first years of college. Like I look at a Nick Smith, kind of had an iffy year at college after being the number 1 recruit in the class of 2022. You also look at Jet Howard out of Michigan. He kind of had an iffy close to the regular season. So it feels like there's a lot of these high prioritized recruits that are big names that didn't necessarily help themselves in college. Keontae George is another one. And so you enter this draft, and I'm at the NBA Draft Combine talking to people, and there's a lot of unknowns with guys that we felt pretty good about when they were getting done with their high school and on the grassroots circuit, but then they go to college and a few flaws of their game get exposed. So I think a lot of teams are kind of pilfering through that and being should we put too much stock into one bad year of college and more look at everything that we see, or is there some red flags that were opened up? So those are some of the big things that I've been looking at and have been really intrigued by throughout this NBA draft, and we're going to get some answers here in a couple weeks.
So one player who obviously is another beloved IU guy is Jalen Hood-Schifino, and watching him throughout college basketball season, it was pretty obvious that his game would translate easier to the pro level because of his size, the shot making, the ball handling, things like that. And so what do you see from him as far as his ability to impact an NBA franchise potentially as one of those lead guards?
Yeah, I feel like for him it's all about the development, and he's still a young guy, but I think as the season kind of went along, his pull-up jumper was something that was really, really good some games, and then other games it would just kind of dissipate. And so there's some consistency that needs to be there. And, a lot of teams, like the scouting report, say force him left for his pull-up. That was a little bit of a problem. But when he gets to his right hand for the pull-up, it's no big deal. I feel like at the next level, that has to become a different part of his game. But you talk to Jalen at the NBA Combine, you talk to people around him, they just rave about this guy. Like, just the person that he is, the winning player that he's been. In high school, he's playing down at Montverde down in Florida with great players, and he just finds a way to impact and put his fingerprints on winning. And again, we saw it last year with Indiana. Early in the year, Xavier Johnson and him are sharing the backcourt. He's trying to find his way. And then Xavier Johnson goes down, and he goes, hey, it's my turn to step up. And he did that. And so I feel like there's a big piece of his game that can be really, really intriguing. I look at him in the mid-teens. I think that you've seen some mock drafts are like, hey, he's a top 10 pick. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I think in the mid-teens, you look at a big, capable shot maker. And if he gets to his pull-up and he then continues to add his finishing around the rim, I mean, he really could be a 3-level scorer at the next level, and that's kind of what we're all looking for, especially with the length and the size that he brings from the lead guard spot.
Isaac Trotter of 24/7 Sports, national college basketball writer for them, joins us here on The Fan. Isaac, I want to stay in the Big Ten for a second. There was a ton of hype around Keegan Murray last year in the lead up to the draft, and obviously he had himself a fine rookie campaign, but when you saw him and his brother out on the floor at times last season, obviously not this past year, but 2 seasons ago, it was like, man, maybe this is going to be the next combo or duo of brothers that are able to make good not only at the college ranks, but do it at the next level. A similar ascension from a sixth man role to a leader on a team happened with Chris this year. Maybe not as high volume scoring as his brother was able to do, but still projects well at the back half of the first round. What do you see when you look at Chris Murray and where his fit could be in this league?
I really like him. I think there's a lot of parts of his game that are really good. I think he's a much better defender than Keegan was at this part of his game. And I think that's kind of what will keep him on the floor. Obviously, Keegan's such a talented offensive player and really shot the cover off the ball at Iowa and obviously last year for the Kings. But I think Chris has to develop a little bit more of the jumper. I think he shot about 33% from three-point range this past season on really good volume. He's taking tough shots. He was kind of their bail-me-out guy for Iowa. But I think defensively, he can be one of those guys. Like, we all look for wing stoppers. That's like the new thing you're trying to find. I don't know if Chris Murray had got a chance to show that a ton last year at Iowa, but I think he can as he moves forward, where he has a little bit less of an offensive role. And again, like I talk about some of those little things with him, he's a great cutter. He's a great offensive rebounder. He's always in the right spot defensively. Like, those little things are easy. Like, you can see that he was born and raised in a basketball family. His dad has played for a long time. Like, he's a basketball junkie. And so I feel like Chris is an interesting prospect because a lot of people lump him in as Keegan, but they're really different. They're very different. And I think they're going to have very different roles at the next level, but they're both going to impact winning.
So, Isaac, you've obviously seen a lot of Zach Edey over the years. He's coming back for his 4th season. I don't know if we've seen a player in the last 20 to 25 years sort of make that leap that he took this past season, to where he went from being, okay, a pretty good player to, okay, he's a national player of the year. What do you expect from him going into another season where he knows he is the top guy this time around? And also, how much pressure does that put on Purdue to perform better in the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Purdue enters this year as Final Four or bust. It feels like the narrative around them. And if they make the Final Four, it's an automatic great success. And getting Edey back is such a huge win for not only for Purdue, but for the whole sport of college basketball. Getting a second year out of a National Player of the Year contender is phenomenal. And, he averages 22 and 13 last year. And I legitimately head into this year going, is 25 and 15 capable? I think that's in the range of potential outcomes. He's so good. He's so dominant. He got so much better. But I think he can even raise his game to a new height. I think he could be a better free throw shooter. I think that Purdue's offense can help him more as long as some of these other guys continue to grow. And, we've talked a lot about Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith needing to take steps forward from year 1 to year 2 as guards. And, I look at some of the other capable supporting cast pieces. Mason Gillis has to get back to shooting at a high level. Ethan Morton has to turn himself into more of an offensive threat. Can they get anything from any of the new guys, the Southern Illinois transfer, or maybe some of the freshmen that are coming in? So it feels like all of these supporting cast pieces, getting them back, there should be a very, very capable team. I think this is a really good team. I think they're going to be awesome in Big Ten play. But still, some of those same concerns I still have in March, and I probably will have them in March until we see, hey, maybe Fletcher Lawyer takes a really, really big jump and Braden Smith takes a really big jump, because I know what Zach Edey does. And if anybody blames that loss in the first round on Zach Edey, we just didn't watch the same game, because he was phenomenal in that game and honestly did more than enough to help Purdue win.
So I'm not going to lie, when I look at Purdue matchups in the postseason, particularly in the NCAA tournament, I'm always like, does the other team have an old guard, and is he little and quick? Because if that's the case, I think they're going to lose, because it just seems like that's the recipe for a lot of teams, honestly, is when you see these upsets, there's guards that have been there for 3, 4, 5 years. They're quick, they can shoot, they're good decision makers. But jokes aside, getting back to Zach Edey, how much is too much to expect from him? Because I do think that some of the limitations with this team is that when they face better competition, it's harder to just throw it inside to the big guy and let him dominate if the other guys aren't at least keeping the defense honest.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was the thing in that first-round loss to Fairleigh Dickinson. There's, 15 to 20 possessions on film where Zach Edey's surrounded by 3 dudes in the paint, and Purdue is shooting horse three-pointers and can't knock them down, right? Like, you're wide open, feet set, multiple things. You could read the entire Indy Star before you take a three. Like, you have a ton of time to pull the trigger there. Like, and they just couldn't knock it down. And that's what I'm talking about, like, with this supporting cast. Like, it's on them. And, we can, put some blame on Matt Painter, or how do you find a way to potentially do different things scheme-wise. But for me, scheme-wise, if you get wide open threes over and over and over again, that's a pretty good look, and it's on the guys to knock them down. I honestly do have confidence that this supporting cast can get better and take strides in year 2 as a whole team. And we talk a ton about, like, getting old, staying old, and having continuity. Purdue will have all of that. And so I feel pretty good about them in the regular season, but again, they have to prove it in March.
Isaac Trotter, national college basketball writer for 24/7 Sports, with us here on the Fan Midday Show. Isaac, I know this is a really tough question to answer because this has basically been lightning in a bottle for the last couple of games in the NBA Finals, and even the Nuggets probably didn't know what they had in terms of getting contributions in the postseason from a rookie. But is there a Christian Braun type within the back end of this draft that could help a contender, or potentially find a role to help a contender? Those that are towards, like I said, the back end of the draft, they're looking for developmental pieces on cheap deals.
No, I think it's a great question. I think a lot of people are looking for it. And one guy that really stood out to me at the NBA Draft Combine was Olivier Maxence Prosper out of Marquette. Phenomenal defender, shot the cover off the ball. His ability to play in pick and rolls was something really improved. But really how he's going to make his money at the next level is defense and playing hard. And he did all of those things for a Marquette team that won the Big East title, and you got a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. And so he had that similar role. And those are the guys that I kind of like to look for in the NBA draft. Like, when you're in college, like, I don't necessarily need to see, like, the super high usage rate. Hey, I got 15 to 18 shots a game. Like, I like to see guys who ace it in their roles that we potentially could see at the NBA level. And that's exactly what Prosper did. And Omax is kind of his nickname. And I love him late in the first round. I think he's a guy that could absolutely be a winning piece for you. I think when you're also looking at that, I look at Jaime Jaquez out of UCLA. Older, winner, tough, did everything for UCLA, like literally everything. Guarded 1 through 5, handled the ball, posted up, run pick and rolls, be a catch and shoot guy. Like, he did everything. And he has been wowing teams throughout the pre-draft process. A lot of guys think that he could potentially rise up, but if he's there in the mid-20s, I think he's a plug-and-play role player, awesome player that can help you win games in the NBA playoffs.
What did you think of Christian Braun's performance in the finals? Because I was watching it last night and thinking, oh my goodness, this kid has a chance to do something that's really, really special, which is win a national championship, win an NBA championship, and be a factor in both of them.
He's just a dog, man. Like, he is just like every loose ball he gets his hands on. I felt like every play, like, he's involved in that play. And that's exactly what his job was at Kansas, right? He just was a wrecking ball. He comes in and immediately the pace of the game changes, the energy of the game changes. And I think you can hear him a lot because he's a trash talker, but I think you really feel him too. Like, you feel his presence on a game. And like, opposing guards like start to get a little bit wary, like when he's in the passing lanes, because he does a great job of like getting that inside hand out and immediately tipping balls. And just, I look for guys that can get their hands on a lot of passes and get a lot of deflections. And that's been Christian Braun's MO for his entire career. And it really doesn't surprise me to see what he's doing for the Nuggets. He's just a perfect fit for them.
Isaac, operating under the assumption that the Pacers stay at 7, what do you think the best fit from a player standpoint would be for that team? And honestly, even if it's not best fit, what do you think would have the biggest impact for where the Pacers want to go, which would be back into the play-in/playoff conversation next year?
They need wings.
Yeah, I'm a huge Cam Whitmore fan. Huge Cam Whitmore fan. I think that he has a chance to be a really, really special player. And, I think a lot of people talk about the jumper last year, and it didn't really go the best way for him. But, he had an injury, he had a thumb injury before the season, and I think he's going to grow as a shooter. But everything else about him, he is legitimately has the most bounce I've seen of a wing prospect in this draft. He is absolutely ridiculous, just athleticism-wise. He can go through multiple defenders at the rim and put you on posters. He's playing last year before the season, before he even got to Villanova. He's playing for Team USA's under-18 team, and they're playing good competition overseas, and he just looks like a man amongst boys. Like, he's playing with five-star talent, and he just looks like a different player, just a different player. And so his body and how young he is and how explosive he can be and just the rim pressure that he puts, that feels like a phenomenal fit for a high IQ, one of the best point guards in the league, and Tyrese Haliburton. I feel like Tyrese Haliburton would make Cam Whitmore's job so much easier. And long-term wise, I think Whitmore would be a phenomenal defender. Now, the problem is I don't know if he's going to be there at 7 because I think a lot of teams really like him too.
So, Isaac, my final question, because I've been in hibernation, I've been in hiding since, Illinois was embarrassed last season by IU. Will Illinois, our beloved Illini, get a game off of these guys this upcoming season?
I think they will. I think Illinois is set up to give Indiana some hard times, to be honest. I think Illinois is old. Illinois projects to be really, really good defensively. I still have some questions about Indiana's perimeter shooting and some of their front court pieces I like on paper, but we just have to see how it all, kind of comes together. And I think Xavier Johnson is as important to any player or as any team in the Big Ten other than Zach Edey. Like, they just have to have him healthy and be really, really good. But if Illinois' old guys can start to gel a little bit better together, I think this roster might not be as talented as last year's, but the pieces just fit together, I think, a little bit better. So Illinois should be really, really good defensively, and those Illinois-Indiana wars should be, just high-level stuff this winter.
Oh, that was music to my ears, Isaac. We got Jimmy Cook, this IU guy over here cringing. I'm sure listeners are like, James, we're going to, stone you next time we see you. So,
at Romeoville, kid. When that happens, you know the day, folks. You know what to do.
I'm with all the smoke. But, Isaac, my man, thank you for coming on. You keep up the great work, man. I love to see your career taking off. And we'll have to play some pickup basketball soon just to kind of reminisce.
Thanks, man. Anytime.
All right, that was Isaac Trotter, national college basketball reporter for 24/7 Sports. Having a little fun there at the end. He is more optimistic than me, Jimmy. I do not think that they're going to get a game off these guys. But if they do, I will be the insufferable person on Twitter. And if they don't, I will be logging out of Twitter because you all will be my mentions, sending me not nice things.
I won't be in the mentions. I'll be in your text message.
This is true. Yeah. Eddie DMs me or texts me every time Illinois gets smacked. Every time.
So
it was only by IU. Come on now. It was only by IU.
Man, for those that are iPhone users, that new update in the fall, we could FaceTime James. When he doesn't answer, we could leave that FaceTime message for him. Just post IU victories. I like it. It's a new trend.
Oh man, I might have to go Android. I don't know.
Oh, don't do that.
Oh, I won't. I have to have my blue messages. But on a more serious note, I do think that what he said about Trayce Jackson-Davis is true as far as what he brings to the team with his vision and his defense. I think there were probably 10 moments last season watching IU where I was like, how did he block that? How was he there? How did this happen? And so those types of plays I think you can't teach. So as much as you want to talk about what he can't do as far as shooting the ball, and again, that's something that is going to just take time and work, really. But I think some of the stuff that he has, you can't teach, like timing on the defensive end, the vision he has. And I'm always going to lean on the side of production matters. And so he was able to produce at a really high level. I get it. He's an older guy. He might not be a star at the next level like he was in college. But I do think there is a pathway for Trayce to become a valuable NBA player and someone you can rely on to make plays at the next level.
There have been a handful of Indiana Hoosiers of the last 5 to 7 years that have made it to the next level that were elite of the elite when they were in college that either found out because the game has changed, and of course there's some exceptions to that, like OG Anunoby is an exception to that rule, but you look at Cody Zeller, you look at Thomas Bryant, you look at Trace Jackson Davis right now, those are all bigs that have had to either A, reinvent themselves, or B, maximize the high value things they could do,
yes,
like staying big down low, like creating proper spacing, even though you were not going to be the one to shoot the ball, you're not getting in the way of the rest of the offense. Dominate the pick and roll. Like, there's been areas where they have found roles. Now, varying degrees of success there between what Trace Jackson Davis could do and a group of Thomas Bryant and Cody Zeller. But even though Bryant's not doing anything right now, he's still in Denver Nuggets roster, so he's in the NBA Finals right now. And Cody Zeller's getting significant minutes occasionally, drawing an offensive foul on Nikola Jokic. So there's going to be a pathway there. I totally agree with you. Where that ceiling is, though, is an entirely different question as he finds his way and goes through this pre-draft process and eventually starts his career in the NBA. With James Boyd, I'm Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison along for the ride as well. Still to come, a conversation with Howard Beck and Ben Athur. Howard Beck at the top of the hour, Ben Athur top of the 2 o'clock hour. We'll return in just a moment, get further in to the Colts outlook, and discuss briefly if running backs really matter anymore on The Fan.
107.5 The Fan.
Fan Midday Show. Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison behind the ones and twos. Ran a little bit long with Isaac Trotter, though. Very informative conversation, getting you set for the NBA draft here in a couple weeks. Podcast will be up wherever you get your podcast a little bit later today. Just search the Fan Midday Show wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, you can find it on 1075thefan.com. We'll keep talking NBA, but this time we'll look at it from a finals perspective and from a big picture of players already in the league perspective as things stand. One of the greats, Howard Beck, going to take some time with us of GQ Sports and Locked On Network. You said we were long here or short here, but now I can't resist. Any reason you're coughing directly into the microphone?
Oh, not a league.
Oh, that's my fault. In the association,
There you
Howard
go.
Beck will join us next.
The Fan.
Jimmy Cook and James Boyd coming to you from the DriveHuber.com studios. Happy Thursday to you on the Fan Midday Show. Eddie Garrison along with us as well. We've bounced around a number of different topics throughout the show so far today. We'll resume our NBA conversation, though this time at the national level. One of the greats, Howard Beck. Nice enough to take some time with us. You can currently find his work with GQ Sports, Locked On Network, of course, in the past with Sports Illustrated, New York Times, LA Daily News. One of the very best at covering the NBA, making some time with us post NBA Finals Game 3. Howard, as you watched all that unfold last night, the conversations continued to be about Miami's ability to respond in the fourth quarter and would those proper adjustments be made. And Denver, much like they did Game 1, felt like they had a thumb on Miami in the second half, unable to give them an inch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody should be surprised at this point, although I don't know what, everybody expects in a series where both of these teams have been kind of, hard to peg for very different reasons. But look, the Nuggets, as they showed in Game 1 and reinforced last night, have a talent advantage. They have a size advantage. They absolutely have an advantage in the paint. We saw that play out in the rebounding numbers. We saw that play out in points in the paint and just their field goal percentage in the paint. They just have more dynamism in their offense. And, I just think it was, in some ways, everything that the Nuggets do feels like some sort of statement because they have been, dealing with some degree of either skepticism, indifference, or ignorance about their talent for a while now. And, when they lose a game at home and they lose home court advantage in Game 2, I do think there was a natural curiosity. Well, what are these guys really made of? We know what they've been able to accomplish. We know the gaudy numbers that Jokic in particular puts up. We know that they had the best record in the West. But what are they going to do when they finally face some adversity in this postseason run? And this is really, I'd say that, truly the first time they faced that was losing home court advantage in this finals by losing Game 2. And, an incredible, reaffirmation last night of who they are.
Howard, when it comes to Nikola Jokic, I was making this joke last night watching the game. He does not miss from 15 feet and in, but he's not, the physically imposing player like Shaq was, or one of those players where you just throw it in, prime Dwight Howard, I'm just going to dunk all over you, and that's how my efficiency is so high. Have you ever seen a player who plays sort of below the rim and just has that touch where it seems like every shot he throws up, it always rolls in or bounces in instead of bouncing out?
It's kind of wild that, even what look like awkward shots, off-balance shots, it doesn't look like it's coming off of his hand with any kind of touch, but it hits the rim and nothing ever falls off the rim. It only falls in, right? I guess, the usual expression is he's got a really soft touch or however you want to frame that. And I guess that's essentially it, right? Like he's not rushed and it doesn't look pretty, but they always drop because he's just got this incredibly soft touch from close range, 10 feet and in. And no, he's not constructed like any other dominant center we've seen in NBA history. I mean, he's an evolutionary kind of player. And, I think maybe that's part of why people have had a hard time grasping his greatness because he doesn't look like the typical, dominant NBA player or especially dominant big. He doesn't play like his predecessors. But it's a strange analogy, but it's kind of like with Steph. Nobody knew what to make of Steph Curry for years. And still, I feel like, and I wrote about this last year when the Warriors were back in the finals, that people never talk about Steph as being dominant because dominant, kind of is always implied in the NBA some degree of physicality or incredible athleticism, big hops, brutish force. But like Jokic can win with force, but it's not the way his game is constructed. And yeah, he's a pass first center who plays like a point guard and then scores when he has to and doesn't do it in the old school way of just backing guys down and dunking on them.
Howard, when you look at this team, you look at how they're constructed and a number of their key contributors, including the big ones, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, are all under contract and underneath team control to a point that, okay, they're able to really see what this thing is for what it is this season and beyond. But for so long, and I think Michael Malone over-exaggerated to an extent. I mean, there's no doubt that Denver hasn't always gotten the love in this run that they've deserved. But when you look at how that might change now moving forward, this series isn't over, but assuming they put a capper on it here in a couple of games, what does this change the perception of the Nuggets moving forward? And how sustainable is this run of, okay, we've got one, let's see if we can go get another one now if they do end up closing this thing out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, look, they've got a couple wins to go still, and, we're not going to count out Miami by any stretch,
Sure.
given the way that the Heat are constantly disproving everything and fighting back. So if the Nuggets do win this championship, and obviously I think Jokic will probably be this finals MVP, it is a crowning achievement for a team and a player that, yes, we've been kind of maybe, I don't want to say overlooking even. I mean, I know they feel that way, but the fact is, when you haven't accomplished anything, you don't get the recognition until you actually accomplish it. And Jokic had gotten individual recognition, and nobody had overlooked that. He won back-to-back MVPs and was in second in the MVP race this year. Like the acknowledgement has been there, but this is a league where, for better or worse, coverage of discussions of the NBA tend to revolve around a handful of supreme players. And, LeBron and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and a bunch of these guys have taken up so much of the oxygen of that discussion for so long that I think that's where people have maybe not, felt like the Nuggets got their due. If you win a championship, you will get your due. You win a championship with a young group that they have, and you have many more years to come of being able to repeat this and make it back. That will do a lot for them as well. But I guarantee you, when we get to October, and the Lakers will have, refortified a little bit around LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and we'll see what the Clippers do with their core, and the Suns will have refilled the roster around Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. We're going to be back to obsessing over a lot of the same characters. Like, it's just the way it goes. And the Nuggets will probably complain again about being overlooked. And I think they actually enjoy that. I think they, on some level it's a contradiction in terms, but like they enjoy the anonymity and not having necessarily all the spotlight and pressure on them, but at the same time they kind of push against it because they feel like they're not getting their due. But I do think that there's a benefit to it for them. So it's a kind of a funny conundrum, but they're here to stay whether they win this championship or not, because the core is young and still evolving and still improving and under contract. They'll eventually have some financial pressures under this new CBA, as everybody will, but this is absolutely a sustainable, powerhouse in the West.
Howard, when you look at what the Heat have been able to do this postseason, in particular, being a team that months ago we all thought probably weren't even going to be in the playoffs, how much credit do you give Eric Spoelstra for being able to galvanize this group, empower this group, and also adjust again, and just find ways to, make it work?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. I was looking this up the other day, and I'm going to have to pull this up while we're talking so I make sure I get the numbers right here. But if you go back to 2000, the Miami Heat, I think it's like the second most finals appearances since 2000, and I just found it interesting because we don't really think about, obviously the Spurs have been, a dynasty of the last 20-something years, and the Warriors, of course, had their run, and the Heat were in 4 straight finals, and the Cavs were in 4 straight finals. But it didn't really, until I did the math, realize, like, you know what? Miami's actually been consistently for the last 20 years one of the best franchises in the NBA. And Spoelstra has been there for most of it, obviously first going from film room to assistant coach to head coach, and he's one of the longest tenured in the league now. They just have a consistency in the way that they do things, and the accountability that they demand of their players, and the kind of players that they seek out. It's not a coincidence that they're the team with all the undrafted guys, and I know that Spoelstra doesn't like us talking about them that way because hey, they're just professional basketball players now. Well, okay, fine, but their path to the NBA and to the Heat was different than most guys, and it's to their credit that players who did not leap off the page when they were coming up through the ranks and went undrafted because of it, could go to Miami, that the Heat would recognize something in them in the way that they worked and the way that they fought, and said, you make sense here, you fit here, and we're going to give you all the opportunity in the world to become a good or to even great NBA player. So there's a personality to that team and to that franchise, and it has never shown more than in this season where, they could underachieve, finish 7th in the East, lose a play-in game, fall to 8th, and then, come all the way to the finals.
Does this run at all change how we should perceive or value teams based on seeding outside of your number 1 and number 2 seeds? Like when you're looking at the rest of the bracket, does it change that at all? Or is this just a really special run that probably is not something that's repeatable if you're a team in a 7 or 8 window like Miami was?
So it is true that the NBA has never had more top to bottom parity than right now. And the standings this season reflected that. The compression within the standings, the fact that there were no truly elite teams at the very top, and not a ton of really god-awful teams at the bottom. There was a really thick middle. And statistically, it bears out. The parity has never been greater. And we did get a 6, 7, and 8 seed all advancing out of the first round for the first time in modern history. All that said, I don't think this is some precedent that the Heat have established. I don't think it's going to be the norm by any stretch that we're going to see 7 and 8 seeds make it to the finals or even to the conference finals. They are an outlier. They're a team that had the best record in the East a year ago. They underachieved to that 7th place spot in the East and then lost a playing game that dropped them to 8th. They're not even a true 8 seed in the way that the Knicks were, say, in 1999 when they made the finals as the only other 8 seed to do it. So if anybody's saying oh, you know what, the regular season doesn't matter, you can just, wander your way through it, be 7th or 8th and still make a run to the finals. It's not impossible. There are certain teams I thought the Lakers had a chance because they had LeBron James, but they had a really weird season. Their record wasn't reflective of who they were. And the Heat's record wasn't really reflective of who they were either. And, a couple of high seeds gags for them to get here, too.
Howard, I'll pivot away from the NBA Finals to the local team here in Indianapolis, the Indiana Pacers. We saw Tyrese Halliburton take a step forward this season and really become a star in this league. What impresses you the most about his game? And maybe being more of an aggressor when it comes to scoring, which is something he's talked about as a difficulty because his automatic, innate thinking is to pass first, but now he's in a position where they need him to score and pass, and it seems like he started to figure it out towards the back half of the season.
Yeah, it's always interesting, young guys who come in as primary ball handlers, and of course he came in as a guy who I don't think the NBA or the Sacramento Kings knew exactly what he would evolve into at the time they got him, and then he's sharing all that time with De'Aaron Fox, and so it was awkward. I think for Tyrese Halliburton to be, the fully realized version of himself, he had to be separated from De'Aaron Fox, and obviously that trade has worked pretty well for both teams. Mm-hmm. But you either come in as a guy who you have the ball in your hands a lot, and you're a great scorer who has to figure out how to become a better playmaker because guys will come in calling their own number too much, right? And then trying to figure out when to pass versus shoot. In Halliburton's case, it's the opposite. He's coming in as a guy who I think was more team-oriented first, was not counted on to be a big-time scorer, and is now having to learn how to take that on himself. You know what? Nikola Jokic had that. The Jokic as essentially, point center hub of the Nuggets offense, Michael Malone has for years been kind of, nudging him, harping on him to score more because he could score at such a high rate, but he is geared to pass first, and that's, I think, Halliburton as well. So again, another, I think, obviously a weird analogy, but it fits. They're built the same in terms of their team mentality. But I think now that Halliburton's had a full season under his belt in Indy, full season minus all the games he missed due to injury. But now that he's had a full year to kind of settle in as clearly a focal point of the team, and he'll go into year 2. Hopefully he stays healthy. The Pacers are going to have, plenty of opportunity in the next few weeks here via the draft and free agency to improve around him. We'll see. Maybe other guys will emerge as scorers, so it won't have to be as much on him. They've got some work to do to build out this roster, but I just think that the way he's built, his basketball IQ, his character, he's obviously great personality, really thoughtful guy. They've got a really special player to build around.
Howard Beck hanging out with us here on the Fan Midday Show. Howard, when you look at both conferences, Eastern and Western, which team do you think has the toughest decisions or could look the most different of the playoff teams this offseason when you look at whatever LA wants to do, if they want to try to readjust or change things there with the Warriors and they look at their aging core? Where in this conference, East and West, do you feel the biggest turnover or changes being made from the playoff teams?
Wow. So in the West, I think it's definitely the Suns. I mean, obviously everybody saw the reports yesterday about Chris Paul and the Suns trying to figure out what to do with him. And they're going to be, they're absolutely going to be considering DeAndre Ayton trades as well. Like the two guys who are their new core now are Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant is on the clock. Like he's up there in years and miles and a lot of injuries. They're going to have to rebuild an entire roster to maximize their time with Durant and Booker as their tandem. So the Suns, I think, are going to have the most change. I don't expect to see a lot of change with the Warriors. I think that core is staying together. They're going to have to make some moves, and maybe they trade Jordan Poole, maybe they trade one of their other young guys. But the Warriors core is staying together. The Lakers already made most of their major moves. I don't believe any of the Kyrie stuff. I think they're probably re-signing most of the guys that they acquired midseason. So it's the Suns who have, I think, the most change among the top teams in the West. In the East, is James Harden going to leave Philly to go back to Houston? I don't understand why this is a thing. I don't understand why he would do that, but clearly it's a thing. And if he leaves, then the Sixers have some serious decisions to make. But again, I don't think it's dramatic changes other than, the loss of Harden. They'll find a way to replace him. Daryl Morey is always pretty creative. So, and then the Nets in my backyard here in Brooklyn, they had to implode a plausible contender at midseason, which just doesn't happen in the NBA. And so they're still trying to figure out what to do with all the pieces they acquired for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And, I'll be very curious to see what they do in the offseason.
Last one from me, Howard. We saw that Monty Williams is going to get another chance to be a head coach in Detroit. Got a nice payday for that. Maybe we should have chose different career paths. But what do you think of his fit there, and particularly the ability to help them grow, perhaps similarly to how he helped the Suns grow when Devin Booker was pretty young over there in Phoenix?
I mean, the Suns had gone through, I can't remember, their playoff drought was like 8 years or something, longer. And it was Monty Williams' arrival followed by Chris Paul's arrival that really turned them around. It was the same core group otherwise. And so, and I always have attributed that to both of them, right? Like, Chris Paul has that impact everywhere he goes. We saw it when he was with Oklahoma briefly too. And so I think it's both of those things. So with Monty going to Detroit, what I'm curious about is they've got such a young group, and they've got another high pick coming, assuming they use it. I wonder what they're going to do in terms of, using their cap room to sign some veterans. Like they need, there's no other Chris Paul other than Chris Paul, and who knows? Maybe Chris Paul's available. I don't know that he wants to go finish his career in Detroit, but I think that Monty Williams, as great a coach as he is, and a culture setter and a tone setter, you need veterans around your young guys to kind of, I think, accelerate that development. And the Pistons are far earlier in that curve than the Suns were at the time that Monty got there. So I don't know that it's fair to expect the same kind of immediate, jump up the standings. I don't even expect that the Pistons are going to make the playoffs next season. But I think Monty's the right coach. I think that they've got a lot of great young talent. Obviously, Cade Cunningham missed this entire season, so getting him back healthy is key. But I do think that they're going to need to start to fortify the young core with some vets.
Howard, last thing on my end, Howard Beck joining us. You can find his work with GQ Sports and a part of the Locked On podcast and Locked On Network. You had a piece that came out in GQ and on GQ Sports and GQ.com this past week where it was a feature piece on Mike Breen. You had an opportunity to have a conversation with him, 18 years calling the NBA Finals. I encourage you to read that wherever you can at GQ.com. And it's bang, Mike Breen on 18 years of calling the NBA Finals. There's a lot there. It's a very comprehensive conversation. If you could highlight one area that either maybe something you didn't know or most intrigued you about the voice of the NBA Finals and Mike Breen during that conversation.
No, thanks for the plug and the kind words. I think actually the thing that came through most, and I've known Mike a long time because I'm here in New York and I covered the Knicks for a long time, So I've known this about Mike, but this is probably the longest we've talked was for this Q&A. And it just, his humility comes through, and if folks read it at GQ.com, you'll see it. Like it, and you can kind of hear his voice the way he says it. Like he's so just grateful for the career he's had. This is his 18th NBA Finals. That's more than anybody else has ever called. He loves the game, and it is absolutely as earnest a passion for the NBA as you could possibly find. But I think what was most endearing were a couple of these stories he told me, one involving I asked about his very first finals in 2006. What did he remember? And he remembered obviously being very nervous, but part of it was that an ESPN producer at that time had told him, look, a lot of casual fans are watching the finals. It'll be the first NBA they're watching all season. Make sure to kind of keep them in mind. And so Mike did this exaggerated thing with me where he said, look, I wasn't actually saying this, but it was as if I was saying things like, and he gets fouled, he's going to go to the free throw line. Now that means nobody can defend him while he shoots the ball, and as if he was over-explaining for people who had never seen basketball in their lives. And he says that's not exactly what he said, but he felt like he was doing that. And his nervousness and his kind of forcing things was so clear that Hubie Brown, who was his broadcast partner for that series, it was during a timeout or halftime, whatever, kind of just like grabbed his arm and said, "Hey, look, kid, we're going to be great. Just relax. Like, just be yourself, do your thing, do what you've always done. This is, basically no different." And it was just such a great, endearing story about both of them, frankly. So yeah, I mean, just Mike Breen is exactly what you feel like you'd get, when you're watching him on TV. What you see and what you hear is what you get. Like he's just a wonderful person, class act all the way through.
Not to give the entire piece away again, you can check this out at GQ.com, but I thought another funny part about it was seeing the story, the Q&A kind of flow from that moment to the moment where you're asking him, have you ever seen a player like Jamal Murray call their own bang? Which was pretty crazy. I mean, it's funny now, even when I'm at home and you hear the bang, everyone knows if you're a big NBA fan, like that is like either a call that is, wow, like fantastic for you, or it's a gut punch because your team just got smacked in the face. So, Howard, when you dove into that, how cool was it to just kind of see him get to a point where he probably never talk about it too much in depth about himself, but get to a point where he's become sort of, synonymous with some of these big NBA moments.
And it's funny, too, because as you read through it, if you look for this, you'll see that almost every time I ask a question, he'll start to answer it, and eventually, by the time he's done talking, he's talking about Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson, or he's talking about players, or he's talking about fans, or he's talking like he always ends up steering it away from himself. And again, very much, Mike Breen's humility coming through every time. The bang thing was really fun to ask him about. I know he's been asked, JJ Redick, I think, had asked him about it on his podcast earlier this year. He's done stories where he's talked about it, the handful of double bangs that he's called at times, and where the bang call came from. He's not the first to ever use it. I can't remember the whole backstory, unfortunately. But it was fun just asking about it because my question was like, do you feel the gravity of it when you're doing it? Do you understand like how big this is for the viewer? Like this is like there's a responsibility that comes with the bang. With great bangs comes great power and responsibility, I guess. And I think he does. Like he's all about like not overdoing it, not overusing it. And even in the way he calls the game, like you can hear it. Like he does not want to come out of the gates with everything sounding like it's the biggest thing that ever happened. And there's a lot of announcers, or there's some now that I think do that where they feel like they're trying to manufacture the excitement, and Mike lets the game carry him. And he came back to that theme several times in our conversation. I didn't use all of that, but just the idea that like the game dictates. You let the game, you do all this preparation, and he prepares. He kept saying he like over prepares, and you end up using a tiny percentage of all the stuff that you prepare for, because the whole point is to let the game dictate the way you call it and what you're highlighting. But the bang conversation was a lot of fun because, it is what it is. And I asked him, like, could we see a triple bang, a quadruple bang? Like, how far could this go? And he's not quite prepared to do the triple bang yet, but I'm still looking forward to one day hearing that.
Well, Howard, man, thank you so much for your time. Like I told you when I reached out to you, I've been reading you for quite some time. I hope you continue to do it for a very long time because you're great at it. And I think in that same vein as Mike Breen, you'll never say it yourself. So I'll say it to the listeners out there. This is one of the best in the game and doing it for, again, as long as I can remember. So, good luck going forward, my man, and enjoy the rest of the NBA Finals.
Thanks, Howard.
Appreciate it, James. Thanks, fellas.
All right. That was Howard Beck. Covers the NBA as a contributor for GQ Sports, the Locked On Network, hoping to, get him back into a full-time gig somewhere else. But as he was saying, Jimmy, do you expect to hear another Jamal Murray bang, in Game 4, or will the Heat, I guess, bang back and have a chance to tie this thing up?
I mean, he didn't play both sides, but he laid it out perfectly, which is that Miami has continued throughout this run when you think they're finally going to lay down to respond very well. But I don't know. This is a great chess match between two coaches, and we've seen Michael Malone now get his opportunity to return serve. We highlighted this yesterday where he was very forthcoming and honest with the media. He didn't break down where the plays were, but he said there were 14 clips from film that led to about 30 Miami Heat points in Game 2 that he just felt like were non-effort plays and they needed to be better at. And again, he wasn't revealing of what those plays were, but he acknowledged at least specifics of we have instances where we know things need to get cleaned up. I think there will be bangs all around in terms of three-point shots, as is tradition with Mike Breen, but it's hard not to feel with where Denver's at, where they've been this series. Like I said, 6 games, right? I Nuggets in 6. I think a lot of us were kind of in that same boat. That's still on path to occur, even if things take a turn or take a shift with Miami, even this series up at 2 games apiece.
Yeah, I do think that Miami's season is on the line in this game, though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you go down 3-1.
Yeah, I don't think you can come back from 3-1. And like I've been saying, going into the finals, you're not playing a team that is talented and doesn't play smart like Boston. Like Boston, to me, was still more talented than Miami. They just played dumber.
Way too inconsistent.
Exactly. The Nuggets are talented and pretty smart. And so I'm curious to see what the others do, because Miami, for better or worse, seems to go as, Max Strus, Caleb Martin, Gabe Vincent go and what they could contribute. And on the flip side, Michael Porter Jr. did not play well at all last game for the Nuggets, so they have to feel pretty good about getting a win despite one of their better offensive players having sort of a pedestrian performance.
I think the one thing when you want to look at with Miami specifically, I think they won their first 5 or 6 games at home. They have now lost their last 3 home games. So I don't know. If you're going to be the underdog in a series and you don't win at home, I think it's wraps.
Yeah, but then they're also so unique because to me, they just do things that don't make sense. Every time I say you shouldn't be able to do it, they do it. And so I get what you're saying, and I do think that the biggest catalyst to that dialogue is Nikola Jokic. You can't lose games at home, but you can't lose games at home against that guy because you're not going up to Denver and beating them very often, in my opinion. So I'm sure Eric Spoelstra will say that's, the untrained eye, as he said in that press conference.
I mean, they hadn't lost a game at home since March? In terms of just what Denver has been about this postseason. I mean, it's a very, very tough place to win ball games in with just how I'm not even going to get into the altitude aspect of it. I just mean how dominant of a team they are. And somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody had said it. And I was thinking the same thing when watching them throughout this playoff run, particularly now in the finals. There's times where their ball movement is just so exquisite that it reminds you a lot of early Warriors ball movement, where every shot that goes in, regardless of who it is, 1 through 5, even into the bench, you think it's going down.
Yeah, I do think that there's some element of that, and maybe Miami's best chance is to, I don't want to say turn Jokic into a scorer because he already is one, but pick your poison where you're like, okay, we'll let this guy just go off and not double, and maybe he scores 45 and has, similar to what it was in Game 2, where he has over 40 points, a handful of assists, and we get out of there by the skin of our teeth because we made shots and no one else really contributed. But when they get the ball hopping, they're the best team in the league, and they're at their best because they have so many guys who can knock down shots, especially if they're open. I mean, they're not like the Lakers or the Memphis or other teams where there's clearly a guy on the floor who can't shoot. Everyone on Denver can score and is a threat, and I think that makes them the most dangerous team in the NBA.
He's James Boyd. I am Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison is here with us as well in the DriveFever.com studios. We're going to step aside. When we return, we'll deliver on that conversation about NFL running backs and if it's gotten even harder for them to get paid and their value within this league. We'll discuss that when we come back on the Fan Midday Show.
The Fan.
Fan Midday Show, Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison. Behind the ones and twos here in the DriveFever.com studios. The world for running backs continues to change and arguably get worse year over year.
Yes.
Particularly as you're hunting for your second contract or first real big money contract in the NFL. That gets a step further today with ESPN.com reporting per sources that the Vikings plan to release star running back Dalvin Cook. He had previously had a contract that would go through 2025. And so now for, again, not officially on the docket just yet, but all indications appear to be that's the move they're going to make. 6 years in the league, he's 27 years old, and you now go look at the other names that are high. Let's look at high-level contributors for the sake of the conversation, because Eddie had brought up a tweet to me earlier, and it threw Kareem Hunt's name in there. Again, a talented running back, but I don't put him in the same truly star power level as some of his fellow running backs in this league. I'm talking about guys like Dalvin Cook, guys like Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott. Jonathan Taylor is in the early step towards being in this same boat, which is that we've now seen a number of instances, some of which have been injury-based, some of which have been the toll that the NFL takes on running backs still in today's game. But by the time these second contracts are given out, there's buyer's remorse, and there's, as a team, we need to do anything we can to get this contract off the books or move away from this player. The only anomaly in all of that is Christian McCaffrey found a home via trade because the Panthers realize this is not a piece that we need right now with where we are as a team. We're paying him too much money. Let's see what we can get for him right now, sell high. And now he's in San Francisco, where you could argue that you could put myself, James, and Eddie out there in some position or another, and they might still be able to tread water within the NFC. All jokes aside, this is the realness when we talk about the decision the Colts are going to have to make with Jonathan Taylor, and not just what it does immediately for somebody like Anthony Richardson, but what it might do to your evaluation of player personnel decisions over the life of contract, assuming they don't tag him and go the route of Le'Veon Bell. There's a lot of different avenues the Colts could go whenever they make a decision on Jonathan Taylor as this season progresses. James, you look at that news today. Does it change at all? Because for me, it was always, running backs, I hate to say it, but they're a dime a dozen for most contenders. Does this news and Dalvin Cook being the latest casualty change anything on your end of how you evaluate that position?
I think it does for the position as a whole, but not for the Colts' specific situation with Jonathan Taylor.
Sure.
I think that a 3-year deal, 45, 42, in that range,
probably fine.
Is fine. And I think after those 3 years, if JT isn't the JT of old, if he's not quite as elite as he's looked throughout his career to start, that's okay, because that at that point you would probably know if Anthony Richardson is your quarterback of the future, and if he's a guy, and for their sake, we'll just assume that he is by that point. If he's a star quarterback by that point, you're okay, because you can figure out the rest from there.
Yep.
And as we've talked about, on air, off air, the great teams with great quarterbacks don't always need the great running back. They just need serviceable guys who can get the job done, keep the defense honest, so to speak. Mahomes and the Chiefs are the exception to the rule because of how special Mahomes is, in my opinion. However, it is sort of that same philosophy around the league when it comes to the Bengals, when it comes to the Bills, where you want to just have and the Bills really need to work on running the ball, but you want to have someone who can just keep the defense honest. Maybe it's by committee. It doesn't have to be one bell cow. But I think for the Colts' sake, this doesn't change anything for them. I would be shocked if they tagged him or didn't re-sign him at some point this offseason because of how much JT means to this franchise. What he's done for the franchise already, again, being, a first-team All-Pro, but also just the uniqueness of where they find themselves with Anthony Richardson. You need JT back there to help him develop not only this year, but for years to come, because to me, this is going to be a long-term sort of ascension for Anthony Richardson. I don't think he's going to be a great quarterback in the NFL, a top 10 quarterback tomorrow, but let's say 2-3 years from now, when JT is still young enough to contribute, to be a high-level running back, that'll really, really help Anthony Richardson if he comes to his own.
A couple things. First off, Jonathan Taylor is as exciting a player in the National Football League when he's not struggling with injuries, when his offensive line's not letting him down. There's no discussion on that. And I know that from a fan perspective, there's a lot of people that absolutely love Jonathan Taylor. He's the favorite player of many a Colts fan. I agree with you if the number's right, if they decide that, okay, 3 years, whatever you mentioned, just hypothetical figures, 45, 50, whatever the case may be, if you're aging it out to the proper process where he's approaching 27 years old, and then you're having a different conversation of, okay, where is he in our franchise? I agree with that. Pay him now to some extent to be able to help in the growth, development, and the ease of this offense with a rookie quarterback in Anthony Richardson. What I don't want to see happen, though, and I don't think the Colts would do this, is if it's a deal that's longer than that, where you're now having to do what Minnesota's doing, which is, again, even though Alexander Mattison has showed time and time again in relief that, okay, maybe this is something special, the Cowboys feel like they had the same thing with Tony Pollard brewing, right? I mean, that's a whole other discussion with him and the tag, but they feel like, okay, we have new next generation running backs ready to relieve the duty of these, I don't want to call them old, but these more seasoned running backs that we're paying top dollar for. It's become a position that's no longer of premium need for most teams. All that said, I would probably, unless the money or that scenario is right, I would look at the tag route with Jonathan Taylor. I understand you're going to have that same conversation with Michael Pittman Jr. this offseason as well, but we were joking about it a little bit off air. The tag and the way that the bargaining agreements are assigned, it favors the teams in such a way that you're at a disservice to yourself as a franchise to pay too early this position, multi-year deals, unless you absolutely have to.
Yeah, it's hard to gauge just like how much a guy's worth and what it means for the rest of your team too, because I do think that when you get in situations where a guy performs and you get to a point where you're kind of at a stalemate, how does that look on the rest of the team? Now, I'm not saying you're negotiating JT's contract for the perception it'll have with the rest of the Colts, but at the same time, you want to reward a guy who's been pretty remarkable, except for last season, and which was more because of the injuries, offensive line, things.
And I don't hold that against him, by the way. I'm talking purely from a dollar standpoint. I'm not saying, oh, he was banged up last year, don't pay him. That's not my warning here. My warning is buyer's remorse that often happens with these running back contracts.
Yeah, again, and I think the number is everything, as it is with every contract, but particularly with running backs. I mean, we live in a world now where you perhaps overpay for a wide receiver because of how valuable they become in a passing league before a running back. I don't know if you can just break the bank for JT and be okay with that. You know, again, if this was Philly and you're like, hey, we're one player away from like being Super Bowl champs, then you just go all in, you pay the money and you worry about it later. But they're not at that point. To me, they're probably not a playoff team. And so you have to think long term a little bit more than teams that are more successful than you were last season.
I think when you look at the landscape of the NFL, you see like Josh Jacobs, he hasn't signed his franchise tag. You look at Saquon Barkley, he hasn't signed his franchise tag. You look at Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, and Dalvin Cook, they're all on the market. If you look at just how many snaps, or not snaps, but like how many rush attempts they have, I think that's the more critical factor here because of the tread on the tires, for lack of a better phrasing. Like you look at Zeke, he's got nearly 2,200 carries between college and the NFL. You look at Fournette, he's around 1,800, and then you look at Dalvin Cook, he's near 2,000. Now, in comparison to JT, he's already at 1,600, so he's already up there because of his usage at Wisconsin, where he had over 900 attempts. And then Saquon, who's trying to get top dollar to be one of the highest paid running backs, he's already at 1,600 rush attempts. So I think that's the part that most of these general managers are trying to navigate when it comes to discussion of contract, because like when you look at running backs, oftentimes they are used a lot in their rookie contract just because they want to maximize the value. And then when it comes to that second contract, that's where you see these teams starting to leave these guys earlier, is because of how much of a workload they had early in their career, and it just catches up to them.
So let me ask both of you, maybe you can chime in. How surprised were you to see Dalvin Cook let go after having, I believe, his fourth consecutive 1,000-yard season? Actually, he's been over 1,100 yards the last four seasons. a Pro Bowler the last 4 seasons, and not to rub salt in the room, but after that 64-yard screen pass touchdown that I witnessed during that comeback against the Colts last season.
I'm not surprised, honestly, because I felt like the writing was on the wall last year. And Kevin O'Connell, he's not Kevin O'Connell's type of running back. I think they want to air it out a little bit more, and I think it allows you a little more flexibility with Madison. Plus the durability. I mean, Madison's still 25 years old, so it's like he's been around in the NFL for 3-4 seasons, and he's still 25. He hasn't really had the chance to shine in the feature back role other than when Dalvin Cook's out. So to me, the Cook carries are piling up, and he's never been healthy outside of last year. So I'm not surprised at all.
They save $9 million in cap space by making this move. Look, am I surprised by it? Maybe a little bit, because I still think Dalvin Cook does have a valuable role within that Vikings offense, even as well as Alexander Madison has looked at times. But with Minnesota, and this is the problem that you don't want to have yourselves in, like, it's not a running back issue with Minnesota. It's a quarterback issue. They're capped. Like, they are capped with Kirk Cousins. I felt that way. Like, even though he's a fine quarterback, there's a difference. Like, people get lost in this. There's a difference between that is a good quarterback in the NFL and that is a quarterback that if he was leading my franchise, I feel confident, set it and forget it, we're good. Like, we're going to be a contender year over year over year. We're going to be fine. Kirk Cousins, all his faults, and sometimes he's an easy target to pick on, but I feel the same way about Jimmy Garoppolo, felt the same way about Derek Carr. Like, there are players that have moments or spurts where, wow, they're really building something special, or while they're a part of a great team. You saw that with Garoppolo in San Francisco, not as much with Carr, but the Raiders are the Raiders, as we know. So what are you going to do there? And with Minnesota, they're in a window where we look at them almost as an afterthought in the NFC, and it's not because they're not a fun team to watch. It's because there's not a ton of teams within the league that are fearful of what Kirk Cousins brings to the table. So am I surprised by the move? To some extent, but also you see it now. James, you mentioned it earlier, whether you look at Kansas City, whether you want to look at Buffalo, whether you want to look at Philadelphia last year, that's not to say that their running backs in those rooms aren't talented, but they're not front of mind. Eddie will appreciate this, best of the best of the best running backs in the National Football League. It's a deep cut. They're talented, though. They fill a role. They keep defenses honest. They control tempo within a game. They take pressure off the quarterbacks. They're not making more than a large share of what your cap space is. And that's what the modern NFL has become. With teams that are true contenders, more often than not, you're not paying high-level, resetting market type of money to the running back position. You just don't do it anymore.
I think if you're the Colts, you have to monitor the Nick Chubb situation, because he will cross the 2,000 attempt plateau this season in Cleveland. And he's got 2 years left on his contract this year and next year. And I think if you monitor Nick Chubb, I think it's a very similar spot where Jonathan Taylor could be in, because Chubb's going to be up there in terms of the relatively the same age and relatively the same number of attempts.
He's 24 years old. You pay him. I'm not saying don't pay him. You either pay him or you tag him. What I'm saying is...
And you don't tag him.
I don't think you can tag him.
Here's why you tag him.
You can't.
Can I bring it to the table, and then you can shoot me down if you still feel this way? And I know we can... You know what? We'll take a break. When we come back, I'll tell you why you could potentially tag him and see if you think I'm crazy on the Fan Midday Show.
The Fan.
Jimmy Cook, James Boyd, Eddie Garrison, Fan Midday Show. So thanks to Isaac Trotter. Howard Beck already joined us. You can find that a little bit later this afternoon, wherever you get your podcast. Search the Fan Midday Show. Ben Athur still to come, top of the hour. We got about 5 minutes here, so I want to revisit our Jonathan Taylor conversation. I'm going to butcher this name, so I apologize. But this is a piece that was done on NFL.com. And again, this is the time of the season where it happens, but it's talking about contracts that could reset the market at certain positions. This was from Anthony Holzman Escarino, senior researcher for the NFL. And as you would guess, at the running back spot, in terms of teams, these are basically all, he calls it the all-paid team of tomorrow. So these are players that can basically reset the market at their respective positions. That player is Jonathan Taylor. If Jonathan Taylor demands in his mind, he's 24 years old, he had the rushing triple crown in 2021. If he has a dominant season again this year, and I look at this both ways, right? I look at it from the player standpoint, the team standpoint. As a player, if that's the kind of year I have, and I'm at that point approaching 25 years old, I want my money. Pay me. And don't just pay me true market reset value. If that's what happens and it's a 5-year deal, I love Jonathan Taylor. He's a great player. All that aside, don't do it. Because worst case scenario, you get out of it like the Vikings did. You cut him and save money, hopefully, at the back end of the deal. Best case scenario, it pans out to a point, but then you're like, wow, the running back production's great, but our team's missing other holes, and we have all this money allocated to the running back. So that is to say, if it happens in 2024, where he's a free agent, and he's demanding market reset money, which you could argue he would have a voice to that if he performs well this year, that's where you would tag him. If he's that valuable to your team, but you don't want to go multi-year with him, you tag him. That's what it's there for. It's a team-based tool so that if you're not willing to commit high-level money to a guy over multi-years, you tag him. You're paying a larger amount up front in a one-year deal than you might have otherwise if you were negotiating a one-year contract, but it's there to help teams keep their star players. Gentlemen, is it still a crazy idea if Jonathan Taylor's like, hey, where's that Brinks truck at?
I don't think it's too crazy. I see your point.
I got a flat no from the other side of the room.
I see your point. I think a point that you brought up that I maybe hadn't fleshed out enough even in my own head was the amount of years. I'm not giving any running back a 5-year deal. I don't really care what you've accomplished. Yeah. 3 years is the sweet spot to me. Now, if you're a player, you want the longer deal, obviously, because you want more security. But I'm not offering probably more than 3 years. And so, to me, it comes down to the 3 years and what the money looks like over 3 years. And the reason why I say that they're probably going to try to avoid the tag is if they need to use the tag, on, say, Pittman or somebody else, like just someone else who could help this team if the negotiations with Jonathan Taylor go pretty well. Like, I would be, for them to tag him, I think it would have to be pretty contentious to the point where, like, they're so far apart where they're like, we're just not going to let you go. But then it calls into question, will we pay you down the line at all? So we'll see. I do see your point, though, because that's one thing that the NFL, at least as far as ownership and coaching staffs and things like that, they're at an advantage where they're able to have more leverage and basically force you to play for them because you have to play on 2 franchise tags to become an unrestricted free agent.
I would pay a pass catcher before I paid a running back in today's NFL. Big money. I'm not saying Michael Pittman Jr. still has to earn it, but in my priorities, I'm paying a pass catcher first, tight end or wide receiver before I pay a running back.
I don't know, but this is what makes it so unique is that JT is special.
He is.
Like, if he wasn't special,
that's why you tag him. He's got to stay.
I know. I get it. And
or he can take a page out of Le'Veon Bell's playbook.
And to be honest, we're talking about other running backs who had better season last year, Saquon and Jacobs, who are going to get franchise tagged and have been franchise tagged. So I see where you're coming from. I just think that the uniqueness of what JT brings to the table for the Colts, where they're at with their quarterback, it allows them to give him a contract that, maybe other teams will be kind of hesitant to do. Because, again, if it's 3 years, you're okay. And then in those 3 years, if Anthony Richardson develops, you feel a lot better about where you are as a franchise.
We're in the hot seats now. James, I'm Jonathan Taylor. I want 5 years.
Oh no,
I'm not coming back.
Then we're gonna tag you and then probably just move on from you.
Well, I'm not saying that the back half of that sentence doesn't have to happen, the move on part, right? Like, you could at some point rectify things, but you value Jonathan Taylor like I do far too much to, if he says I want 5, not break out the tag, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. I agree with that. 100%. I'm just saying that I believe JT's a smart guy. He's smart enough to ask for more. I would always ask. It's like, when you doing your reviews with your company. You don't ask, you don't get. Yeah, it's like, how have you done, review-wise? Oh, I did fantastic. I did wonderful. I deserve every raise in the book. But at the same time, that's when the ownership, the management has to come in and say, this is where we value you. Don't disrespect the guy. But also, that's what negotiations are. It's not always the, best of both worlds, but it can still be a pretty good world if it's 3 years and $46 million.
Well, one gentleman that knows a ton about the running back market because it's impacted his beat for quite some time is Ben Athur. He covers the AFC South for Fox Sports. We didn't even talk about Derrick Henry within that conversation. And again, another situation.
He's the alien.
We'll dive further into that. I want to get Eddie's perspective on this a little bit later, bottom of the 2 o'clock hour, when we look more at running backs and where they are in the league. But we'll take a trip around the AFC South and the NFL at large when we come back. Ben Athur of Fox Sports joins the Fan Midday Show. Keep it right here.
Seven five, The Fan.
Still here in the DriveHubler.com studio. I'm James Boyd alongside Eddie Garrison, Jimmy Cook. We've had a lot of discussions about the NFL, the Colts, the AFC South. We're going to continue that conversation here with Ben Athur, my guy who covers the AFC South for Fox Sports. I just want to say that Ben is also a pretty nice pickup basketball player. We had a good time hooping it up at the YMCA during the combine. So, Ben, how you doing, man? Back from vacation?
I'm doing well, bro. Thanks for the shout out. Really, really appreciate it. But no, for real, it's good to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me.
So, obviously, the big news of this week here in Indianapolis is the alleged gambling violation by Isaiah Rodgers Sr., the Colts cornerback. You have a unique perspective given that you cover the entire AFC South and you've sort of been around to see the redemption story for Calvin Ridley. So I guess I'll start there. What has it been like to see him back out on the field, and what does he have to say about what he's learned from his experience where he lost the entire season because he bet on NFL games?
Yeah, I think with Calvin, I mean, he looks phenomenal in Jacksonville. Has gotten real acclimated with the Jags and the offense and Trevor Lawrence and how they want to do things down there. And I think when you're away from football, like for a year, like he was, you find, I mean, he loved football and actually wrote a feature on it. And he's always loved the game. But I think when you have it taken away from you for a year, you find a greater appreciation for it. And you don't take the little things for granted, like kind of the opportunity to go out there each and every day, even some of the, I think the mundane of, especially during the season where, all the weeks sort of feel the same. I think Calvin came out of it with a stronger appreciation, and it seems like he's, grown a whole lot. If you remember, he had the Players Tribune article earlier in the off season explaining how he was very regretful for his actions in regard to gambling and regretted not just how it impacted him, but his loved ones, his family having to see that news and kind of everything he had to deal with there, and then explaining kind of the headspace, the dark mental headspace he was in when he did the gambling. And so from all indications and from the reporting I was able to do on Calvin, it seems like he's grown a lot over the past year, and he has definitely a hunger and an extreme focus to come back this season and show that he's still that guy that put up 1,400 receiving yards or close to it in 2020.
Ben, when I look at the latest second wave that the NFL's labeled it as, with gambling going on within their players across the league, but I look at how monumental and just the shock value was, at least from a media member, from a reporter, from a fan standpoint, of Calvin Ridley's 1-year suspension. I thought, okay, the NFL's not messing around here. Like, this is a clear statement to the league. If you're caught up in this, particularly if you're doing so on NFL games, we're not going to tolerate it. Where's been the mixed messaging, misunderstanding, or why are these actions being taken by the players when they know that this is a league that's not going to toy around with this? They clearly, from the get-go, are not having kid gloves when it comes to players betting on the sport.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can't speak for the players that decide to go out and make these decisions. I think we have to remember that at the end of the day, a lot of these guys are still extremely young in their early and mid 20s, and sometimes you just, unfortunately, you make decisions that you regret, and sometimes decisions that you're not supposed to do. And but yeah, I mean, it's very clear from just the way the NFL has been educating players and teams that it's not okay. I can remember the other day, I think EJ Speed or a couple other the Colts players were saying how it was very clear that gambling is not worth it in terms of betting on games and whatnot. And so the messaging is clearly there, but yeah, I mean it happens, and it's unfortunate, and from reporting from national reports that have been circulating, it sounds like there could be more, maybe possibly a lot more to come in terms of possible violations of the gambling policy, and I guess we'll just kind of see how all that unfolds. And with Isaiah Rodgers' situation in particular, we still don't know all the particulars of that. The league is still investigating that situation. But yeah, I just think it's also important, although we know this messaging has been very clear about that players can't do this, that these guys are still very young and that they're figuring themselves out at this point. But it is, though, unfortunate, especially when you have a situation like Isaiah Rodgers, when he could potentially be costing himself millions of dollars, right, because he's entering the last year of his rookie contract and whatnot. And it's a kind of a disappointing situation. But yeah, the messaging is out there, but I think sometimes with young guys, I think it's impossible to be 100% in terms of, following the guidelines as is, if kind of what I'm saying makes sense.
Ben, to sort of pivot away from the gambling conversation and to go back to Jacksonville, who the Colts will host in week 1, what do you think, and I know you had a piece recently on Trevor Lawrence, his ascension, him being sort of the top dog for that franchise now, a clear franchise quarterback. What do you think Calvin Ridley adds to that team and their ability to sort of put a hold on this division?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, he had that like 1,400 receiving yards season with the Falcons a few years ago. He's a proven number one receiver, and that's what he's going to give Trevor Lawrence and this offense. Christian Kirk was the Jacksonville's number one option last season, and had a career year. Really shut people up about kind of the big contract he got, and everyone was like, "Man, why is Christian Kirk getting a bag like that?" But he really showed out and performed like a number one receiver. But in Calvin, you have a guy who's like a bona fide number one, and so when you can add Calvin Ridley to an offense where you already have a Christian Kirk who becomes your 1B or wide receiver 2 or whatever, and then you have an Evan Ingram who's a really great a tight end, a pass catching option for Trevor Lawrence, and Zay Jones. I think people have to remember Zay Jones had I think it was 80 plus receptions for Jacksonville last season, and so it's just kind of like the cherry on top almost for Trevor Lawrence in terms of the weapons he has around him. I mean, no one else in the division has anything close to what Trevor Lawrence has. On top of him already being like the top quarterback in the division, he has the best line and he has the best receiving core in the division, and so I think it kind of they have the foundation in place for Trevor and for that offense in Jacksonville to take another huge step forward. And I know for them, the big goal is kind of doing what they did at the end of last season again, right? Now it's trying to be consistent to building off of that and making sure it's not a one-hit wonder what happened at the end of last year. And I think Calvin Ridley helps them on paper kind of take that to the next level.
Ben Athur covers the AFC South for Fox Sports with us here on the Fan Midday Show. DeAndre Hopkins slated to fly to Nashville on Sunday per Tom Pelissero, visit with the Titans. Is this a clear indication that at this point in his career, or at least for this season, he's interested in where can I find the most money? And B, whether it's that or not, what does this do, if at all, to Tennessee when you look at where they are at as a franchise in a South that, even though they had opportunities to close it out, like your piece mentions, it looks like this is going to be Jacksonville's for the taking and Jacksonville's to run for the coming seasons until things change within the other teams in the South?
Yeah, I think with DeAndre Hopkins, it's still kind of hard to see exactly what he's looking for. As you said, I mean, I think money is always going to play a factor. But you would think that maybe at this stage in his career, DeAndre would maybe want to go to kind of be that cherry on top, so to speak, for one of the teams truly in contention for a Super Bowl, like, I don't know, like the Bills, or if the Chiefs need another receiver. But we have to remember that with DeAndre Hopkins, he has a lot of relationships in the Titans building. Mike Vrabel was in Houston with him. The offensive coordinator, Tim Kelly, was with him in Houston. He was Hopkins' play caller for a season in Houston. The Titans' defensive coordinator, Shane Bowen, was also in Houston. I mean, there are a lot of ties from a relationship standpoint, and across the league. A lot of guys do want to play for Mike Vrabel, just kind of the way he runs his ship, the culture in place, even if the Titans aren't on paper necessarily as good as they've been in previous seasons. I think that, like I said, that this is Jacksonville's division to lose, but I do still think the Titans will be competitive in the playoff race. And then just in terms of what DeAndre Hopkins would give the Titans, I mean, the Titans have one of the worst receiving rooms in the NFL. I mean, they were pretty bad last year, and they haven't really done a whole lot to add to that room, which has kind of surprised a lot of people here in Nashville. I mean, they released Robert Woods, and then they didn't draft a receiver until the 7th round, and picked up a veteran kind of reserve in Chris Moore. And so there have been a lot of questions. And so I think if you can bring in a guy like DeAndre Hopkins to pair with Treylon Burks, who I believe is going to make a really big year 2 jump, just because he looks like a completely different player in off-season practices. I think if you can have him kind of take pressure off Treylon Burks, and mentor him, and even give pointers to the DBs on the other side. The Titans have a really young DB room apart from their 2 starting safeties. They have a lot of young cornerbacks, and so you think about the overall positive impact that DeAndre could have on the Titans, even if they're not one of the quote-unquote top teams in the AFC at the moment. I think there are a lot of reasons why it would be appealing. But I guess we'll see. I mean, the Titans, that they have kind of been burned by veteran, highly touted receivers the last couple years. Julio Jones was supposed to be this great addition for them a couple years ago, and that didn't work out. He missed a ton of games with a hamstring injury. Robert Woods didn't work out. He lasted just a season. So I don't know. We'll kind of see how this all shakes, but like I said, that there are a lot of strong relationships between Hopkins and the Titans side.
Ben, when you look at the quarterbacks in this division, obviously top dog, like we've previously stated, is Trevor Lawrence, but then 3 of the top 4 rookie quarterbacks come to the AFC South. I know you got a piece on C.J. Stroud. Will Levis is now in Tennessee. He might have an opportunity to play, depending on how things go with that QB competition. And then here in Indy, we have the QB competition of Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew. But with Anthony in particular, what perhaps entices you about what he could do in Shane Steichen's offense alongside a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who is top 5 at his position?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it there. I mean, you just kind of think, James, of kind of the potential of an option offense, right? With having Anthony Richardson under center. We all know what Shane Steichen was able to do with Anthony Richardson and Jalen Hurts are different. They're both dual threat. They're different kinds of dual threat quarterbacks. But you think of the foundation of what Steichen was able to do with Jalen and helping him become the MVP caliber, star quarterback he blossomed into last season. And I think it's very natural to think about Shane being able to do similar types of concepts with Anthony Richardson, and potentially on steroids, just because he is a better athlete than Hurts, maybe not as polished, but you think of the potential and upside, it's certainly there. And you kind of think of a Lamar Jackson type of offense too. And when you have a dynamic running back like Jonathan Taylor, assuming he gets back to his
All-Pro form from 2021. I mean, it could be some really exciting looks that we see. And I know that not long after Anthony Richardson was drafted, he had talked to you guys about being able in this offense, being able to do some of the things that he saw at Jalen, that he saw Steichen do with Jalen in Philly. And so I think there's a lot of excitement, from that point of view. But as we all know, I mean, it's going to be a long road of ups and downs with Anthony Richardson, a guy who just turned 21, a guy who started just 12, 13 games at Florida. So it's going to be a long process in terms of the development, but you think of the potential in terms of what the offense could look like in terms of the multiplicity of it and being able to give defenses different looks, just because you have a guy in Anthony Richardson who could beat you with his arm or his legs, and then having a running back next to him who's really top 3 in the league when he's fully healthy. I think that's a lot of reason for excitement.
Ben, with the news that Dalvin Cook is projected to be released by the Minnesota Vikings, and you look at where the Colts are at with Jonathan Taylor right now, the Titans are obviously with restructuring. Next season is going to be a free agency year for Derrick Henry. And you go look at some of the big name running backs that are either trying to fight off of the tag or are realizing that more and more teams are in this camp of we're not giving long, multi-year, high-level dollar amount deals to a position that is expendable. When you look at the Colts situation, I'm not saying don't pay Jonathan Taylor, but are we at a point in the league where 5-year deals, maybe even 4-year deals, regardless of how old you are either becoming outdated to a point that 3-year deals are safe, or will we continue to see teams reset the market like the Panthers did with Christian McCaffrey, and then by the time you're halfway through that contract realize that this wasn't a good decision for our franchise, it's time to cut bait and try to move on?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the latter, right? It's definitely a changing of the guard in terms of how teams and how fans, how we view the value of the running back position. I think versatility, of course, is kind of the utmost importance now. You look at the guys who are commanding big money in a lot of ways now are guys or the running backs who seem to have the most interest are the ones who are able to do multiple things. I mean, even though Christian McCaffrey and the Panthers didn't work out, I mean, he's in a situation in San Francisco where they're really utilizing him as both a runner and the phenomenal pass catcher that he is. We know what Alvin Kamara has done with the Saints, the value of a guy like Austin Eckler. I mean, just in terms of kind of those really long deals for running backs, I'm not sure what we're going to see that as a trend anymore, just because of the way football is headed. And I think we see a lot of teams now just look to making sure they have 2-3 guys that they can depend on, right? Like even, I just think in the division with Jacksonville, like Travis Etienne really had his true rookie season this past year because he missed his entire, true rookie season, the 2021 season due to injury. And he really showed that he's a guy in 2022. But what does Jacksonville do? They get a guy in the 3rd round in Tank Bigsby, who's high 3rd round pick, one of the top backs in the SEC last season. And I won't be so surprised if they're having Tank Bigsby take a lot of kind of the workload off of Etienne. And Etienne is a guy that doesn't even have as much tread on his tires as some of the other, established bell cow backs that we think of. And so it's just a different time for running backs. Versatility, as I said, having guys who can catch the ball, proficiently out of the backfield. that's of utmost importance. But then I think kind of with Jonathan Taylor's situation, I think in his favor, when you do have a young franchise quarterback that you're looking to groom, I think you always want a guy who that you can give it to 15, 20 times a game if needed, and really take pressure off. And so I think if Jonathan Taylor, comes back healthy and stays healthy and kind of looks more like he did in 2021, it's going to be a really tough situation for Indy to kind of let him walk or not give him, premium dollar just because of the value he means to that particular team. So it's an interesting conversation, and the running back position continues to evolve. But I think there's always going to be room for teams, especially with young quarterbacks, needing to give them room and time to develop. When you have a guy that you can give them the ball 15, 20 times, I think there is ease that comes with that if you're a franchise.
Ben, we look at the rookie quarterbacks in this class. I always thought that Bryce Young was the best one. Obviously, the Panthers thought that too and drafted him number 1. But with CJ, when I saw him at the Combine, as far as who will go number 2, who will be that second quarterback off the board, what jumped out to me was not only his accuracy, the way he throws the ball, things like that, but was the confidence. And I read your story that you had about him, and he had this great quote in the introductory press conference where he says, Ohio State, whereas the quarterback, you're right under LeBron. You're leader of the whole state, and dealing with that pressure. And so what has it been like to see him sort of get implemented with the Houston Texans and what he could possibly mean to another franchise in this AFC South division that's trying to right the ship and enter a new era?
Yeah, I think with CJ, I mean, he's going to have a lot of eyeballs on him, obviously. I think with Houston, that they've kind of done some similar to what in Indy, what they've kind of been doing with Anthony Richardson, and that at times he's kind of split reps with the ones, but you've also seen him get extended look with the twos as he continues to learn how to read these NFL coverages and what opposing defenses are throwing at him. And so he seems to really be coming along. He seems to be ahead of schedule, according to what D'Amico Ryans has said, just in his poise, in his confidence, and his eagerness to learn. The other day, last week, the Titans DC Matt Burke had mentioned how the defense in like a session in team drills or whatever, they threw CJ a look that he didn't quite grasp or comprehend, and then after practice, as he was walking away, like CJ ran him, yelled and ran him down and said hey, kind of what was going on here. And so I think when you have a guy who is very talented, but knows that he has a long way to go and is eager to learn and is taking people, whether it's veteran players or coaches on the other side of the ball, and really trying to understand what he's seeing and what's going on and how to beat certain things, that's real positive sign. And obviously we're not really going to know what the Texans have in CJ for real until the games start. But in terms of doing everything right at this stage, in terms of being handling, extended reps with the twos and dealing with mistakes and picking the brains of the defense, I think he's kind of checking all those boxes right now.
Ben, I really appreciate your time, man. When I hit you up last week and you were on vacation, I was like, we have to get him next time. And so you're a man of your word. I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about the AFC South, what you got going on. And again, for listeners out there, you can follow Ben on Twitter. You can check out his work at foxsports.com, and his Twitter handle is Ben Y. Athur. So, Ben, thanks for your time, man, and I'll see you soon when the season gets underway.
Sounds good, James. Appreciate you having me.
Again, that was Ben Athur for Fox Sports. Cover a lot of ground there in a division that has a lot of intriguing storylines, Jimmy, whether you look at the Colts, Anthony Richardson, Houston with C.J. Stroud, Tennessee, Derrick Henry's future. Could Will Levis get some starting reps or starting snaps this season? And then obviously with the division frontrunner, I think, in Jacksonville.
This appears to be the next chapter in the history of the AFC South, where after a time of Colts dominance and then this weird stretch the last 8 or 9 season where it's been a dogfight to see who's actually going to come out of it, at least is what Jacksonville thinks anyway, that they now have the top quarterback in the division, that they now have the top coach in the division, and this is going to be theirs to run until that duo breaks up. Now, so much can change within this league and this division, in that if you get the right draft pick out of the gate, that's easier said than done at the quarterback position, that, okay, maybe you're back ahead of schedule, or maybe you're back in this conversation. You look up and down the rest of the division, everybody is chasing what Jacksonville has right now. Like, I get it. I understand that it was a close race towards the end, and it took Jacksonville really piecing some things together late to be able to get the separation they needed, along with some stumbles from the Titans. But if I am a Jacksonville Jaguars fan and I have Trevor Lawrence and he appeared last year to be the quarterback that was advertised out of college, there's no one else in this division right now at that position that scares me. Ryan Tannehill doesn't scare me. Will Levis doesn't scare me. C.J. Stroud doesn't scare me. And right now, Anthony Richardson doesn't scare me. Doesn't mean that can't change. A lot of those are rookies I just rattled off there. But everybody's chasing Jacksonville now, and that's something that you haven't been able to say with true confidence in a long time. And that's not something that Colts fans like to hear, but it's the reality of where the division is at right now.
And I think it speaks to the level of, one, landing your franchise quarterback, and two, getting the right coach in there, because we were not saying this a year ago going into year 2 for Trevor Lawrence. We were all thinking, one, his coach was at the time not, in my opinion, a true NFL coach.
Bust was used, James.
Yeah.
Like those, like albeit from the most controversial of the NFL media market, but that word was thrown around because of what a year with Urban Meyer did to Trevor Lawrence.
Yes, and to piggyback off of that, you see the complete 180 that happened when he got, Doug Peterson in there, and obviously they added some talent there with Christian Kirk. They added Calvin Ridley this year, so they're going to be loaded. And what makes them so unique, and really any team that can kind of define their division and lead their division, is the NFL with so much parity that goes on, you just want to get into the dance and have a shot. And if you can win your division, get a home playoff game, that gives you a pretty good shot. Not a great one, because obviously, and especially in the AFC, there's so many teams with so many good quarterbacks. But if you get in the dance with that guy, with that team, you feel confident that, if you get the right breaks and the right plays or the right, matchups, you have a good a chance as anybody because you trust in your guy that much. And so that's the benefit of having, again, someone who can change your franchise, which obviously the Colts hope to have found with Anthony Richardson.
He's James Boyd. I am Jimmy Cook. We're going to step aside. When we return, some news regarding a rookie quarterback from this past year's NFL draft. And has that news created intrigue for this team, or is it a nothing burger that we should have expected all along? We'll evaluate that when we return on the Fan Midday Show.
The Fan.
Jimmy Cook with James Boyd, Eddie Garrison guiding us through the afternoon. Thanks so much for spending part of your Thursday with us. Reminder, Ride with JMV, come up here in just a little bit at the top of the hour, then a little bit later here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final. Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. Knights lead it 2-0 as Florida looks to get on the board. We'll have some bets on that front. Next segment, before we dive into any of that, I propose the following story to both of you and see if this is nothing or if it is a interesting development in the ranks of rookie quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. And that is from Adam Schefter, that the next step towards starting week 1 has been taken by Panthers rookie quarterback Bryce Young. Because now, gentlemen, if you were to go look on the Panthers official depth chart, Andy Dalton no longer in that top spot. It's Bryce Young as the QB1 listed through there. Here's my issue. Young was getting all the majority of the reps to begin with anyway. He was basically the de facto. But Frank Reich says it's the next step in the top pick of this year's draft, becoming the week 1 starter. Is this monumental for Carolina, or is it a nothing burger?
Why are you whipping out the track update voice right now?
Because I'm stuck with it from the Stanley Cup Finals and I can't get out of it. I'm trapped. I'm sorry.
You sound like Eddie White in a post-game show when he gets his Bob level going. He literally can't get out of it.
So Eddie Garrison here is in bully mode, but we'll pivot away from that.
I understand. What's new?
I do
it's
think
in troll mode. I'm not a bully.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a fine line.
Fair enough. There's always love on this show.
Yeah, there's no hate.
Animosity, maybe.
But I will say this. I do think that it's significant that he's getting behind him so early on. And maybe that's just to make it abundantly clear that he's the guy and to get away from what the Colts will deal with for the entire summer, which is, which quarterback are you starting? Is it really him? Is he really number 1? And so I think it's good for their franchise if they believe in him that much. Just go ahead and say he's the guy so everyone else can get on board, whether that's rookies and veterans. And it also might speak to how advanced Bryce Young is as far as his knowledge of the game, what he's seen, and his ability to galvanize his teammates. Now, when we talked to him at the NFL Draft Combine, my only pushback about him was his command of the media session, which I don't know how much weight you put into that, but he just sounded so pleasant and nice and like happy to be there. And I'm like, where's the dog at? Like, you've had to have some dog in you to play at Alabama, win a national championship, although he wasn't the starter when they did win it when he was there, but, you know, play in these big games. And there has to be some fire there. So I'm assuming that some of that has been on display, at least to his teammates, to the point where they're starting to galvanize behind him and rally behind him. So we'll see how it plays out. And I guess the bigger question for us on this Colts beat or in this Colts land is, will it be Bryce Young versus Anthony Richardson week 9 at Carolina?
Yes.
It better be.
Oh, you got pitchforks for both of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, if it's...
I'm just asking. I can't see the future, man. I'm just asking.
The pitchforks aren't at you. That's just a world that I can't travel into. Because if he's not the starter by then, and either something hasn't happened from a health standpoint that's limiting him from being available, or just a true setback that is like, yeah, he's just not ready. We're sitting him the whole year. I will be very frustrated.
I'm hearing sad Jimmy. I'm seeing sad Jimmy pictures in my mind if this were to happen.
Okay, you want to read about a 15 for 25 day from Gardner Minshew in a 10-point loss to the Patriots? I mean, I know you're going to enjoy Germany all the same, but that's what you want?
Hey, man, I'm the unbiased reporter.
Ah, okay.
I have to cover the team. But I do think that, again,
objectivity.
They're in a unique spot where over in Carolina, they can just say he's the guy. I mean, he's the number 1 pick.
Whoa. He's not the guy. It's a next step. Let's be clear. It's a next step.
The next step to being the guy.
I'm just saying. I'm just
number 1. I mean, and then is anybody surprised? You traded a lot to go get that guy at number 1, and I don't think anybody should be surprised or upset. Andy Dalton obviously knows what he signed up for, and I think that the Carolina is going to be in a good spot if Bryce Young so far continues this sort of ascension into that starting role where I believe they're further along than most teams with the rookie quarterback, where they have a chance to actually make the playoffs and do something, pretty special year one.
It's fascinating how this conversation can shift, because clearly Gardner Minshew at this stage in his career versus Andy Dalton at this stage in his career, Gardner Minshew adds more to a team in terms of if you were to put him out there as a starter, he's going to be able to do more, in my mind anyway, than Andy Dalton would. And again, I know that when you look at the assets that were given up to go get Bryce Young, it seems like an obvious decision that, yeah, look at that quarterback room. Dalton's not starting over him. There's no way. Bryce Young's going to be your week one starter. And that is the just interesting back and forth that the Colts are, as you mentioned, going to have to deal with this summer. But also it's just like, again, unless it comes out, and these questions will be asked, whether Shane Steichen answers them or not remains to be seen. You'll ask them, Stephen Holder will ask them, Kevin Bowen will ask them, et cetera, et cetera. Why isn't he starting if he ends up not being the week one starter, if he's not there week two? And the only satisfactory answer for me is he doesn't understand the playbook, or he doesn't understand what's being asked of him. Like, that's it. This is, I know it's the National Football League and it's a different animal, but unless it's a real developmental thing that you don't think is rep based, not you, but Shane Steichen, he's out there week one for me. He just is.
Jimmy, I'm going to get you a guest pass to come to Colts, and you can ask all these questions.
Oh, I know what the answer's going to be. Did you read the gambling press conference? I understand. I
mean,
get
hey,
it.
I was
you were
there.
You lived it.
I was there. I will say this. It is something that I expect to be drawn out over the summer. I don't expect an answer anytime soon. I mean, honestly, we could be...
This will be right down to the wire.
Yeah, I believe a few days, down to... At the earliest, I think could be maybe like a week before the season.
I was going to ask you, before or after final preseason game?
They don't have a reason to really do it. I think it's probably going to come after the final preseason game, and then it might be a situation where they tell the team internally, like, who the guy is ahead of the season opener, and then we just don't know until we see who's taking the one snaps, on game day and things like that, just to keep the mystery up. So we'll see. I do think that it just adds to every little nugget we get and how we dissect it. Because even watching practices, the last two times that we've been available to go or allowed to go as media members to OTAs, Gardner Minshew has had all of the first team reps with 11-on-11 drills. And then Shane Steichen comes back and says, well, that's just how it worked out, when you guys were coming here on these days. And I'm like, probably there's some truth to that. We've gone on different days. It hasn't been the same day every week. However, at some point we're going to have to see something. And so when we get to, I think training camp will be obviously more revealing, especially in those joint practices, because you're going to see who's really running with who. And I think that will be a lot more of a window into what's going on, rather than this one day week we have right now where we're seeing literally an hour and then we don't know what's happened in all the other hours that we haven't seen.
I'm putting my tinfoil cap here on.
Yes, I love a tinfoil cap.
I know Jimmy loves this.
Yes.
Here we go.
Give it to me.
This is their way of managing expectations. They know which days you guys are going to be out there. So they know if they roll out Gardner Minshew after, whatever it was, Richardson taking all the first team reps the first time you guys were out there. Now it's been Minshew taking all the first team reps the last two times you've been out there. All it is just management of expectation. I believe Shane Steichen when he says, you guys just happen to be here on the days where Gardner Minshew is taking all the reps with the number ones. Like, I think this is their way of managing expectation and kind of like put a message out to the rest of the league that, hey, we may not know who the starting quarterback is yet.
You know what I wanted to say yesterday? Because he was like, yeah, it just happened to work out that way if you guys are here tomorrow. And I'm like, invite me to come tomorrow. I would be here, but you're not letting me come tomorrow. So that's always the flip side. But Eddie, you make a great point. And I do think that to make that point bigger, that's what they struggle with in years past, is managing expectations, because
we've got a winner. He's won the lottery.
And it starts at the top, when it comes to the owner. Jim Irsay is always going to talk about Lombardis because that's just what he does. So we'll see. I just think that there's going to be some pressure that comes with this decision, and we won't see that decision come to a head anytime soon.
I'm going to put the tinfoil cap on a little bit tighter. If I was the head coach, I would be purposely putting Minshew out there on days you were there to keep the conversrsation going about what's going to happen with this quarterback room, just to frustrate people, just to be petty. That's what I would do.
Well, you know me, I'm a petty person, so I agree.
We can all get behind that
I
to some
agree.
extent. Jimmy Cook and James Boyd, Eddie Garrison here on the Fan Midday Show. When we return, bets to close out the show. Plus, we'll play the latest edition of a new game I like to call People in James Mentions. I think he's being too critical of the team. We come back on the Fan Midday Show.
7-5, The Fan.
Feeling so fly like a G6 here in the DriveHumor.com studios. Just Google the lyrics, and then you can find the song. Podcast audience, you're not going to be able to hear it. It is what it is. That's fine. I'm digressing too much on the song. We've got a lot to get to here to close out the show. First, I promised earlier in the show that we would allow some franchise tag observation from Eddie Garrison on Twitter, Eddie Garrison _, aka the _. Eddie, how do you feel about the idea of tagging Jonathan Taylor if he counters that he wants more years than you're willing to give?
All right. Thank you for your time here in Indianapolis. I wish you nothing but the luck in your future team. That's my response.
Letting him walk, that's it.
Yep. I'm letting him walk.
Wow. All right.
I would rather allocate that money to re-signing Grover Stewart because he's also under his contract is also expiring after this season. Allocate that money towards Michael Pittman Jr. a little bit and do the unthinkable of Chris Ballard or what he hasn't done yet, and that's spend money on a premier position at wideout to go get a guy that can help Anthony Richardson's development. Because I'm sorry, as a passer, Jonathan Taylor does not help Anthony Richardson's development as a passer. And in order for him to take that leap as a passer, he needs a wideout that is top tier, that is, viewed as a true number one. I don't think Pittman's that because in my eyes, when you look at a wide receiver one, it's a guy that you can go out there, you can put him outside, you can put him in the slot, and he's like, go get open, and I can get you the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Just go get open and I'll get it to you. Right now, I don't think Michael Pittman Jr. is that.
There's a hotkey on the board that Eddie's probably not going to be able to find in time where I make the following noise, which is, what? I have no idea what Eddie was talking about there in regards to letting Jonathan Taylor walk.
What?
There it is. That wasn't too bad. I'm able to imitate myself. Look at me. But in all seriousness, Eddie, before we get to the picks.
Oh, and additionally here, you make players very, very unhappy when you tag them. And if you want Jonathan Taylor happy, you don't tag him because I don't know if he would. I don't know if he would do this or not, considering how nice of a guy he is. But look at the current running backs right now. What's the likelihood that Saquon, Josh Jacobs, and Tony Pollard play underneath the tag? I think it's slim to none.
And if they don't do it, they're running the risk of playing the game that Le'Veon Bell played, which is, I'm sorry about your luck. We're not doing anything with you. Enjoy a season off from football. I do want to get to one more thing, though, in regard to the tag, which is that, so Eddie, the price of the tag would be too much for you before I ask my next question?
For that position, yeah.
Okay, so if he says he's okay with a 3-year deal, but he wants high-level money that is about the same as the tag would be over 3 years, are you in a similar boat?
You would have to front load it for me in order to be happy with that.
Okay.
But I'm still in the camp that I would rather have Grover Stewart back, and I would rather have a premium wide receiver.
James, I need a minute from you on response to the following, which is people in your mentions when you post a tweet that said, more drills with Gardner Minshew, Sam Ehlinger, and Anthony Richardson. All three couldn't put it in the net, and Richardson's went over the net. You got to reply. Imagine if someone watched you type and every typo that magnified, they just put it under a microscope like that. Boyd really missed the mark on that article attempt. He left a dangling participle right out in the open. Rookie mistake in this latest edition. Give me about a minute or less on this.
So I posted the Game of Thrones where he takes the sword out. He's going to fight all the people. That's what I do daily with my writing. And it's what it is. When you have a public job, you get criticized a lot. I get criticized every single day for what I write. And so when that comment was made, I thought it was funny because I'm like, wait a second. This happens every single day. And they are not as gracious as I was to Anthony Richardson on that throw. And I think, in fairness to me, I posted another video right after that of him ripping the net on another throw. So I think sometimes fans get confused and forget, again, I'm a nice guy, positive guy, but I'm not working for the team. I work for an independent outlet. And so I posted the good, the bad, and it is what it is. And I think that is more fair of where he is as a player as opposed to just basically cutting up a highlight tape, which is easy to do. Like, honestly, I could make every player look great if I only showed you the clips that were good. But I feel like if you want to be truly in the know of what's going on, this is what happened at the camp or at OTAs. And, again, you don't have to be too mean to me about it. You can be.
At Romeoville Kid, he's not carrying water for people. Let's make some bets.
The Jay Cook Plays of the Day.
This is me, all right? I'm not a athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
I will be quick with this. We're betting the New York Yankees on the money line twice today because they have a doubleheader against Chicago White Sox. We're also going to take the Houston Astros on the money line over the Toronto Blue Jays. San Francisco Giants straight up on the money line against the Colorado Rockies. Over 6 total goals for Florida Panthers and the Las Vegas Golden Knights. 2-1 yesterday, 3-5 on the week. Eddie, what do you have?
I've got nothing. I'm not wasting my breath on what I've tried to preach to you the last 3 days.
I took the over. Thought you'd like the over.
No, we're not talking about that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We're talking about going to full game
about.
money lines. You always go first 5 if you like the starting pitch-up matchup. Always first 5, my friend.
Who might argue with that? James Boyd will be back in here with us tomorrow. James, always good to have you. Eddie, thanks for your help as well. Special thanks to Isaac Trotter, Howard Beck, and Ben Athur for joining us throughout the show today. Podcast will be up. Search the Fan Midday Show wherever you get your podcast. Stanley Cup Finals Game 3, Golden Knights and Panthers still to come at 7:30. But before any of that, the Ride with JMV is next. Keep it right here.